What's a dead giveaway someone was an only child? Story 1. I have an only child. Her roughhousing skills are below par. We have family friends with 3 daughters around her age, and I tell her not to get involved in their spats because they will throw down. My daughter is the only one. We took her to judo classes, and it was fascinating to see the difference between her and another girl who had just started. She has 3 older brothers. My daughter looked like a deer in headlights for the first few lessons. Meanwhile, the other girl was roughhousing immediately with the other kids. It's getting better now. I grew up with an older brother, and I credit the experience with keeping me alive during a situation where a man tried to get a little fresh. I stomped on his foot, ducked under his arm, and ran into an all-night restaurant, and stayed there drinking coffee until dawn. I don't think it would have occurred to me to do that if I hadn't fought with my brother my entire life. I have a similar story. That's crazy. I've always fought dirty with my siblings, aka kids I grew up with and lived with. I was the biter and the scratcher stomping on my brother's foot, so when he went down to grab it because ow, I could deck him because he was too tall for me to do it normally, kid. My sister was not. She didn't roughhouse much after growing up a bit. One day a few years back, I just randomly told her that if she ever needed to protect herself, kick the bejesus out of someone's knee to buckle it inwards. I don't know why, I just worried about her because she wasn't scrappy, and we had been talking about, I think, some true crime case before that. Literally within a few weeks, or maybe a month later, some crazy whacked out dude was staying in the homeless shelter that she worked at and tried to hit her with a pickaxe, like straight up booking it with it in his hands. She managed to move out of his path and then immediately kicked the snot out of his knee like I told her to and booked it out of there with her coworker. It's wild how childhood roughhousing ended up keeping you and my sister safe in 2 insane situations. I told my daughter since she doesn't have a sibling, it's up to me to wrestle with her and give her a hard time. Things like turning the overhead light in her room off when I walked by, or chasing her down when she steals some of my food. Or when she told me the house looked boring without holiday decorations and I replied, "You're boring." She knows it's a joke and I wouldn't do any of it if I thought it was truly upsetting her. What's childhood without your family annoying you sometimes? I was really worried about this with my son, especially since I had a brother about a year younger I used to fight with like we were bear cubs. So I made sure to enroll him in activities with other kids. When he was really little, it was things like a tumbling or gymnastics class at the YMCA. And of course, every summer we had him going to day camp so that he could be around other kids. He's a teenager now, and since he was about 8, he's been in Taekwondo. That seems to have done the trick with roughhousing. All the kids I was friends with who were only children were horribly bad at wrestling around and roughhousing. You'd be just trying to tackle them and maybe pin them on their backs and suddenly they're biting you or sticking fingers in your mouth or eyes, acting like they gotta fight for their life and doing a really shit job at it at that. My brothers and I were like, we don't wrestle around with our cousin David. He'll lay on his back and bite your legs or try to grab your balls and squeeze them until you let him back up. Nobody wrestles with David. Story 2. They're great with other people's parents because they grew up chatting with adults. My son, who was an only child, is now in his early 20s, and my friends have always said he is their favorite child out of all of their friends because of how grown up he is. I then ask them, who is this child they speak of? LOL. In all seriousness, he is an amazing young man, and I cannot be more proud of him. The 3rd or 4th time I met my father-in-law, we ended up chatting for like 4 hours while my now wife and her siblings went off and hung out in the other room. I had a great time, and the siblings all thanked me later for playing interference so they could hang out for a long time without dad about. My mom likes to bring up the time they dropped me off at some friend's house and went to a party, and then the parents of the kid I had been dropped off with showed up at the same party. My mom asked if they wanted money for the babysitter, to which my friend's parents replied, "Why would they get a babysitter? Me is there." We gave him $20 to order a pizza. I was the same age as the other kids. I get compliments about my 12-year-old, only child, at least once a week because of this. He is very confident talking to adults because he is involved in our conversations at home and we welcome his input and value his opinions. We definitely have rules and discipline, but we treat him like he's one of us. Love that kid to the moon. Story 3. They get along with grown-ups better than kids their own age. Yep, when the main people you have to talk to are your parents, your vocabulary and general knowledge are usually several years ahead of your peers. The few friends I did have were either only children as well, or else they were a lot older or a lot younger than their siblings. And to add, strictly speaking of today's children, I nannied a boy for 3 years who was an only child. He was completely incapable of entertaining himself whatsoever. Like, as I was talking, would follow me to the bathroom and whine that he was bored because I was in there for 2 minutes. completely incapable of imaginative play and basically expected to be entertained 24/7. If you weren't putting on a show for him, he wasn't happy, and when I wasn't working, his parents basically just had him on his iPad because they didn't feel like dealing with him. When I stopped working for them, he was 7 and still couldn't ride a bike because it was an activity or skill that you had to have done alone. Someone can't do it for you, and he refused to learn for that reason. I've since heard that his parents wound up having twins after I quit, and that he's had an extremely hard time with the transition. Go figure. My son is only 5, and I've already started seeing this in him. He plays with other kids just fine, but it feels like he leans more towards the adults. He finds some of the games kids play at his daycare too rough because he's not used to rough play at home with siblings. People always comment on how articulate he is too. I guess because he talks to us way more than other kids, and I've always been conscious of not dumbing things down too much for him. We never really did baby talk when he was a baby. I do notice when he hangs out with his cousin for a while, he adopts a more babyish way of speaking though, and he's only 6 months younger. Story 4. They just get up and leave a room without saying anything or announcing where they're going. I read this and then a second later it sunk in. Now I'm suddenly hyper aware of the fact, and my friends with siblings announce where we're going when, or just before we leave a room, while my friends who were only children don't. Damn, never noticed it before. Yeah, it's kinda crazy that Reddit just discovered some universal unspoken law. I'm an only child and I have never considered announcing why I'm getting up, unless it's somehow necessary. Pausing a movie, does anyone else want a soda? The complete confusion from siblings I'm seeing in the comments is shocking me. I wonder if it's because I never had to cooperate with anyone about what activity we were doing. Like if I'm playing a game, I never had someone else I was playing it with. If I leave it up on the TV for an hour while I make dinner, it's just gonna still be on the TV when I get back. No one's gonna change it. You just blew my mind. I have 4 siblings and my roommate is an only child. He does this, and I just thought he was weird. He rarely tells me what he's doing or where he's going. I always tell him if I'm gone for the night or going to be home late, but he never does, unless I ask him. I just got home from work an hour ago and I literally can't tell if he's home or not. He may come through the back door any minute, or out of his bedroom. The suspense kills me sometimes. And whenever we watch a movie or something together, he just gets up and leaves when it's over. No, well, I'm going to bed. Just gone. He thought it was weird when we first moved in together when I asked him to let me know when he was getting in the shower in case I needed the bathroom first to pee before he got in. Now it all makes so much sense. Story 5. They leave their Halloween candy in the kitchen. I have 3 siblings and we all put it in the living room. Sort it into 3 piles of different stuff since we normally all have at least 1 pillowcase stuffed full each. And then we all just pick at it for the 2 weeks it lasts. Oh man, reminds me of this one time when my 5 cousins came to stay with us temporarily for like 2 weeks while their mom and dad went to visit an ill parent in another state. So now there are 10 kids in the house and all of my Halloween candy disappeared. I hid it well in the closet. They figured out who it was because they were throwing up gum and candy everywhere. I was bummed to lose all my candy that way. There were 4 of us kids, and growing up, one of my little brothers would hide his Halloween candy behind the hot water heater. None of us knew, and he would slowly ration it out over the year while the rest of us ate all of ours almost immediately. When we moved from that house, we had driven 2 states away, and he was suddenly sobbing because he realized he had left the remainder of his Halloween candy hidden there. He is such a sentimental little dude. He probably still thinks of it years later with regret. Story 6. They eat their food leisurely. This made me laugh so hard. I have 2 siblings, and when I was growing up, we'd go to McDonald's and my parents would have us share a large fry, instead of splitting them up equally, which was apparently too logical and too much work, lol. They always just dump them out, and we'd all have to fend for ourselves. I'm an only child. When I started kindergarten, I told the teacher the cafeteria was too loud and I needed peace to eat to properly digest. I was 4. I sat with the principal's secretary to have lunch for a while, not sure if it was an only child thing or because my Sicilian dad put such importance on eating being an experience. I remember being invited to a friend's place for dinner. He wanted to repay me because he ate at my place so often. 5 kids in that family. The mum sat me at one end of the table and served my food first. She sits, her husband says, "Go," and the entire family goes to war over the table. It took about 10 seconds before the center of the table was empty and people were just shoveling food into their gobs. I was in shock. They'd literally just finished eating before I even had a bite. I didn't know what to do with myself. Never did that again. Mate was always welcome at mine though. I wish. I'm an only child, but my mother has OCD and will start washing the dishes when dinner starts. If you put down your fork for more than 30 seconds or stop eating from a dish, she'll take it and toss the food into the trash and wash the dish or fork, even if you still plan on finishing the food. Then you gotta get up and make a new plate of food for yourself and make sure you don't take any breaks between bites. I learned to eat almost anything in less than 5 minutes. I can finish a bowl of cereal in like 30 seconds. Story 7. Being content with being alone for extended periods of time. Nah, I'm the 5th child out of a family of 7, and I love being alone. I don't even like having friends stay over because I love my own space. I shared a room with my siblings up until the age of 14, so I never got to have my own space in my development age. Maybe this is why all my friends were acting like COVID-19 isolation was the end of the world. Not COVID itself, but rather having to isolate yourself from others. I had some friends acting like they would rather die than go a day without seeing another human. Like, just find a hobby, read a book. It was freaking awesome not having to deal with or see people. This is the one that even the most trusted and closest people in my life don't seem to understand. They will hear me say it and conceptually understand, saying things like everybody needs their alone time and space sometimes, but they won't notice that I haven't had any time to myself for weeks, and I'm starting to lose my mind a little bit. I honestly can and have stayed on my own for weeks at a time and absolutely loved it, but I have found that it can be quite hurtful and offensive to a lot of people, especially ones who are really close to you and that you love a lot, to hear that ideally you want them to go away. Story 8. As an only child, I'd say the struggle with conflict. It's either all or nothing because the only daily conflict you witness is your parents, and they can often go under the radar with minor conflict. So you're only exposed to major disagreements and think all disagreements go like that, whereas people with siblings know when to fight or just get over stuff. As a parent of an only child, this explains why every single time we, the parents, have a disagreement with the kid hits the nuke these fools from outer space button. The kid has only ever seen our major disagreements, and we haven't modeled minor disagreement resolution because it's over in 2 minutes. I think you just made us better parents. That's a great point. I grew up with siblings after we fought it out the conflict would be over, but my husband, who was an only child, keeps it inside and doesn't get over conflict as easily. I also had to learn personal space. He was used to having lots of time by himself to decompress, while I was used to having someone else in the room most of the time. We learned early in our relationship to communicate when one of us just needs time alone. I've had to remind my wife, we're not horrible for arguing respectfully in front of our kid. He has to learn about conflict somehow. The kid being present also keeps us behaving better in our choice of words, so it all works out nicely. Her parents never argued because they had given up on each other, so it's been foreign to her that two people who love each other also will argue. When my husband, then boyfriend, and I moved in together, I was so sensitive to fights and simple little spats that couples might randomly have, disagreements and stuff. My parents had fought in front of me, but I didn't have the model of arguing with a sibling. Every little tiff was the end of the world for me at first. I chalked it up to being a drama queen, but then I realized it felt like the end of the world to me because I didn't have someone to share those moments with. I had to handle all of my conflicts, personal and others, on my own. I can still be a little sensitive about fights, but I'm leagues better than I used to be. So I'm a single mom raising an only child, and I keep a peaceful home, but make sure he sees my full range of emotions and reminds him every time that my feelings aren't his fault. And feelings are normal. I find myself trying to find ways to play the role of sibling or both parents or sort of fabricate similar scenarios. It's not over the top, it's all on the DL, but I let him know when his dad and I are having disagreements. Not bad-mouthing them, of course, or when we annoy or frustrate one another. Unfortunately, I have to sort of make it known versus my kid seeing it organically, but I want him to know that all the emotions others feel are fine. And all the uncomfortable feelings we have abound with others are fine. Shit happens. Because I work so hard to keep a peaceful, happy home, I have to sort of work in the drama. I want him to be well-adjusted. So far, he is a social butterfly, so I think it's working. Story 9. They panic when siblings act like siblings. Oh my god, I can't believe you talk to your sister that way. You should apologize. What if she thinks you hate her? Listen, I'm the only one who can talk to her like that. It's how we keep our relationship alive. My brother-in-law is an only child and he still gets a shock. Since so many only children don't understand, I'll repeat my reply from further down. Growing up together means we know each other well enough to tease each other mercilessly, while staying away from topics that would actually hurt. I'm overweight and I have clubbed thumbs. My family is a veritable cornucopia of thumb jokes, which I find absolutely hilarious, but my weight is off limits. So true. My siblings and I constantly tease each other. We know just where to draw the line. I had a boyfriend once who was an only child, and he'd get so uptight and try to defend me, the relationship didn't last long. Everyone had to be so careful what they said to not hurt his feelings. I had a friend in high school who was an only child as well, and just couldn't handle being teased either. Like just joking around. Don't know if all only children are like that, but those are the experiences I've had. Story 10. My wife was an only child, and the only thing I notice is that she doesn't quite have the same perspective of personal space that people with siblings do. For example, our bathroom has 2 sinks and 2 drawers. My multiple sibling mind says there's 2 of us, 1 sink each, 1 drawer each. Her only child's mind thinks it's all open. For example, brushing her teeth in whatever sink, putting stuff in whatever drawer, etc. When you have siblings, you have to fight for your drawer. But when you are an only child, it's just a drawer. My husband is like this. We have a double sink with enough space in the middle to put a third, but literally the only sink room I have is for my toothbrush and toothpaste. I used to keep all my makeup in the guest bathroom in my old place because he'd spread out all the way across. Our new house has a small vanity space in addition to our double sink. Now I just keep all my makeup in a rolling box and only use my sink for teeth brushing, and he has a whole ass double sink, 2 cabinets, and 3 drawers to himself. He just has no sense of sharing space. Story 11. Alone, but never lonely. Absolutely. I can always quietly entertain myself, as can my only. My spouse is the oldest of 3, and he is always talking or engaging in some way. In addition, he has the TV on in the background. He doesn't understand how I can just sit there and do something quietly for hours, such as a jigsaw puzzle, just as I don't understand how he can tolerate that much noise or feel the urge to always be interacting with other people. Story 12. As an only child, and now an adult, I crave my me time to do whatever it is that I do. I also don't like people, my husband, kids, or grandkids, etc., to touch my stuff. I will buy you what I have, but please don't touch my stuff. I don't understand the concept of borrowing something. Oh gosh, this is me. I'll buy a special snack or something, and if my husband eats it, I get mad. His reaction is always, "You can buy more at the store, what's the big deal?" And I know he's right, I can. But it was for me. Especially now as a mom to 2, I rarely have anything that is just for me anymore. I'm working on it, but I very much have stuff that I want to be just mine. As a kid who has a brother, I feel the same way about my stuff, but for different reasons. My brother was very destructive with toys as a kid, so anytime he'd get a hold of my stuff, something would get broken or lost. Nowadays, the only people who can mess with my stuff are my closest friends and my wife. They know me well enough to know not to mess around and find out, lol. The point is, you're not alone with just other only children on this one. Story 13. I have a way stronger aversion to gentle bullying than my partners who have siblings. I also have way thinner emotional skin than they do, and I'm working on that. And no, I was in daycare and school forever, but my parents were also 40 when they had me, so I got adultified real quick. Yeah, I never wanted to hurt other kids in school, so I had zero idea how to respond to bullies. I was always just confused as to why they would choose to be mean. I'm a weird combo of being sensitive interpersonally, but also not giving AF otherwise. Having worked in customer service for a long time, so I generally choose not to keep many close relationships. I never thought about parents' ages having an impact in any kind of way other than the natural parts of aging, like more injury-prone or less mobility or whatever happening sooner than if your parents were younger. My parents were both late 30s when they had me, and my dad had been forced into an early retirement a few years before I was born due to an injury that never healed properly. This will be something interesting to think about. I have the same aversion. I also seem to have a hard time knowing when I'm being teased. I tend to take people at their word, so teasing and joking can often be very challenging. Anyone else? I'm not sure if the autism is muddling it, hint it is, but I've had the same thing with taking people at their word and being absolutely blindsided by deadpan sarcasm, which I'm very good at recognizing and rolling with most of the time, but with people I'm not generally conversational with, it's flatly impossible to tell. Had a friend's dad get me one time with that. I asked if we could get ice pops out of the freezer and he went, "What? No." And I was like, okay, no problem, and got very confused when my friend went for the freezer. Story 14. As an only child, I absolutely need quiet alone time. I spent a lot of time alone as a kid, playing games alone in my room or the living room while my parents did whatever. If I go a day without quiet alone time, like on vacation or visiting someone else's house, I start to lose my sanity. My best friend grew up with 2 brothers and has always had roommates. I would rather live in a freaking shed than with other people. Anyway, a few years ago we planned this big vacation and she started inviting other people. Within a month it went from just us to her boyfriend, kid, and 2 couples. I freaking dipped. A house full of people for a week sounds like a goddamned nightmare. If I don't get my 1 day a week where I don't work and my fiance does, I get upset. He doesn't get it at all, and I have to constantly explain it isn't personal, just how I was raised. My dad and I lived together for a few years when I was an adult, and we literally didn't have furniture in the living room because we just hung out in our rooms. Now literally every day except for the 1 day I'm off and he isn't doing everything together. Which is fine, I love him, but God, sometimes I wish I had more time to myself. This is my son. I'm 2 of 5 from a low-income family, so it was always close quarters, and I was responsible for my siblings from a young age. The peace I have with one child is sometimes uncomfortable for me. He loves his quiet, peaceful time. He's always been very adult, an old soul. I wish he would have just interacted and played more when he was growing up. He's 19 now, still loves his quiet, peaceful existence. Same. A few years ago, I took a road trip to Vermont with a few friends. After 2 days of being out in the sticks, basically going back and forth between our packed Airbnb and friend's house, we went into Burlington for a day. By the time we hit the city, I couldn't break away from the group fast enough. I think I made the excuse I wanted to check out some record shops and didn't want to bore them, and still offend them a little bit, but I literally just needed an hour to grab a coffee and walk around on my own and enjoy some quiet. Great trip. Loved Vermont and loved seeing everybody, but that hour and a half of walking around alone was the highlight of my trip. Story 15. They don't lock the bathroom door, or any door in the house. I don't even close doors. And even after 17 years, my husband still has to remind me. I do remember to shut the bathroom door when we have company, because there was nothing worse than seeing my mother on the shitter with the door wide open when I was a kid. I learned to shut it quickly. Story 16. Still have toys and stuff from childhood. This is actually such a good one. I was shocked at how much my only child friend and their parents had of their childhood toys, clothes, decorations, school assignments, other sentimental objects, etc. Stuff isn't getting destroyed by more than one kid using it. There's more personal, sentimental ownership over things that were only ever yours, and there's often just more space for storage in a home with fewer children. A good chunk of my childhood stuff was either used to extinction, passed down, community property between my siblings and me, so no one really had that strong bond with it, or just needed to be thrown out or donated because we needed the space. I'm sure my mom has some pictures and maybe some baby blankets in the garage or something, but I don't think I could tell you where a single toy, poster, etc. is now to save my life. I'm currently pregnant with our first. I have a sister, but she's 9 years older, so I was basically raised an only child. My husband is one of 6. All of my childhood things are conveniently still saved at my parents' house. My poor husband doesn't really have anything left from his childhood aside from some pictures his mom is sending us. His brothers destroyed everything. But this post made me so elated to remember that I have an arsenal of things to pass down to our children. Story 17. I like to hang out with people. Not distressing to be by myself. This is something I've had problems with in relationships. Sometimes in order to recharge my batteries, I need alone time. Full alone time. Every single one of my exes would get butthurt if I wanted time alone. You can't recharge with me? Don't you love me? It's not about love. It's that I grew up solo. I grew up knowing how to keep my own company. That is now my default for how to recharge. It's not personal, it's just me. I'm single now and I'm realizing that that's a default state for me. I'm much happier being single than I ever was in a relationship. I can go hang out with people as much as I want and then go home alone to recharge without anyone bugging me or starting an argument. It's glorious. I know not all onlys are like me. Some thrive on being around others. I'm just not one of those. This is me in many ways. I thrived during the pandemic when I could go days without seeing anyone but my roommate in the kitchen for 1 hour. Funnily enough, I know some people described having a bad marriage as like they have a roommate, not a spouse. To me, this sounds lovely for a marriage. Sharing the same house and liking each other but not needing to be around each other. I'm dating now and she's a homebody, so it's a good balance. We can spend time together but not interact a lot, and that's fine. This is my issue. As an only child with parents that didn't really do the whole raising and family thing, I'm damn good at being alone. I love being alone. I can see a room in silence and happily read a book for hours. All my friends have siblings. My boyfriend has siblings. None of them understand. They need constant attention and having people around. All my girlfriends complain about hating being alone and can't handle it. They cannot comprehend that I enjoy being alone. I need it alone. Story 18. Might just be me, but as an only child, I'm guilty of long-winded, emotional paragraph dumps. I don't have anyone frequently accessible to vent to, so I save up my social energy and unload at an unsuspecting friend all at once. Sometimes I'll look at the wall of text I just sent and be like, damn it, I did it again. This. Wow, I always feel so bad for the unsuspecting friend, but then I think, who else am I going to say these things to? You know there are certain things you can't tell your parents, so who do you tell them to? I've been trying to keep a journal to avoid the paragraph dumps on people. Story 19. My observation is that people who grew up as the only child in the family do not rush while eating. When dining out with several of my acquaintances, who grew up as the only child, I notice that they eat their meals slowly and enjoy every bite, while I, coming from a large family, devour my portion like a wild animal. Story 20. As an only child, I've always struggled to make friends. Even now, as an almost 30-year-old adult, I'm an awkward duck. I like my time and get overwhelmed being around people for too long. For example, I hated sleepovers as a teenager because at the end of the day, I have had enough and wanted my own space. Also, I am probably a bit too sensitive. I grew up without the teasing that siblings give. So when someone teases me, I can't really tell if they're kidding or not. Same here. I don't know how to socialize properly. In any social situation, I end up feeling like a dog who was raised with cats, visiting a dog park for the first time. I'm also sensitive and can't take a little teasing, which made elementary school an unforgettable experience. I was not only an only child, but for a long time I was also the only kid in the family, so I had no concept of socialization with other kids until I went to school at 6 years old. Once when I was about 10 or so, my parents brought up the idea of sending me to summer camp. I instantly burst into tears as soon as they mentioned it because the thought of having to socialize with 60 unknown kids was too much for me. Story 21. They are much politer, or they have a sense of entitlement. It's one or the other. Also, you cannot joke with them beyond a limit if they grew up an only child. It's hurtful since they weren't basically verbally abused by siblings growing up. I revealed my sister used to bite me in fights growing up as kids, and my friend who was an only child was so shocked and looked at me like I was crazy. Meanwhile, my friend who has siblings saw it as normal and said they used to try to throw each other down the stairs. Bosses, what is the worst interview you've seen? Had a guy who interviewed for a position. Seemed to do okay in the actual interview, but when he was not selected for the position, he sent us an invoice for a few $1,000s. He charged us his normal hourly rate for his time and billed us for 50 hours. How was this situation handled after the bill? People are laughing at him on the internet as we speak. One time, an applicant told me that he was temporarily placed in charge of a team, and one of the team members spoke mostly French, so he told him to learn English or get out of here, and then subsequently sent him home when he did not immediately learn English. The question was, tell me about a time that you worked well under loose supervision. Sounds like the average boss to me. So this guy went through 5 30 to 60-minute interviews. I thought he was great and was ready to hire him. Just as a formality, I asked my boss to interview him. After 15 minutes, she walked out and tells us to send him home. This is what he asked her. I'm not sexist, but I know a lot of other people think women aren't great engineers. So my question is, how is it that you got into such a high-level position? Was it luck? Why? Why would you ever ask that? My old boss told me that one of the applicants put Jesus Christ as a reference. He asked him, how would we contact your reference, since the applicant didn't put any contact info for Jesus, and my old boss was curious about how he will answer. Apparently, the applicant told him, like this, and then he started praying. I forgot to ask him if he got the job or not, since I couldn't stop laughing. Why didn't I get the job? We talked to your contact, and he said don't do it, bro. We tried to contact your reference multiple times with no answer. A woman was about 15 years older than I was and clearly didn't understand that I was the one interviewing her for the job. This was an engineering position on my team making $175K. She was very candid with me regarding her overall personality and actually put her purse on her lap at one point and did her makeup while we were talking. I guess she thought I was the secretary and she was making small talk before meeting with my boss. How did the interview go, and how did she react when she realized you were the one interviewing her? I don't think she ever really realized. She met with a colleague after meeting with me, and I assume she gave him the real interview face. We laughed at her afterwards and shredded her resume. Interviewer: so, what qualities can you bring to the team? Applicant: I don't know. Interviewer: well, what do you consider yourself good at? Applicant: I don't know. Interviewer: okay. Why did you apply for the position? Applicant: they told me to. Interviewer: who told you to apply? Applicant: I don't know. Back when I was an HR manager for a market research firm, one of the most awkward interviews was with my candidate and his mother. This 19-year-old, who apparently had previous work experience in customer service, brought his mother into the interview with him. I politely questioned his mother as to the reasoning for her joining in on the interview, and I was told, I'm just making sure this is the right company for him and making sure you're asking fair questions. I decided to roll with it. Why not? This is the most interesting thing I've had all week. So I asked my first question and she answered for him. I politely explained that the interviews I conduct are with the candidate only, unless special accommodations are required. I was told, I'm not going anywhere. I thanked them both for coming out and explained that the position requires problem solving and critical thinking on an individual level. Unless I'm hiring both of them under one salary and working together as a full-time equivalent, this wouldn't work. I was then told I would be sued and to screw myself. Poor kid. He was probably like, Mom, I got this. I know what I'm doing. And she was like, oh, my poor baby, who did this to you? We had an applicant for a teaching position who stated on his resume that he held a Master of Music degree from Yale. When interviewing him, I asked what he thought of Woolsey Hall, Yale's primary concert hall, and its renowned pipe organ. By his answer and facial expression, I could tell he'd never been there. After he left, I called contacts at the university who confirmed that they'd never heard of him and no one by his name had received a degree there. I'll bet he doesn't really have a doctorate of Kung Fu either. I once interviewed a guy for a work-study position at a college radio station. The position was for 10 hours a week as a sports reporter. I told him that he would sometimes have to carry the equipment for the remote broadcast of sports, and he immediately took his shoe and sock off and put his foot on the table to show me a scar on his foot. Tells me that he has a plate in his foot and sometimes it hurts, and he wouldn't be able to carry heavy things when it was hurting. Why couldn't he just have said it? No visual aid is needed. I have no idea. What was crazy is that the interview was going really well up until that point. I mean, dressed in a suit, very polite, and seemed knowledgeable. Then puts his nasty foot on the table. I've got tons of these. This one is my current favorite. I had a guy come in for a CDL and site work, truck driving and earth moving equipment, position. After the initial pleasantries, he went on to inform me that he didn't like small talk. His pet peeve is people who socialize too much on the job when there is work to be done. He likes to get right to it and get hammering away on that work. He just doesn't understand these people who just talk and talk instead of getting on with it. Not like him. He is not interested in chatting. No, he's got a better work ethic than these damn kids, and he's not going to stand around gabbing about anything when time is wasting, etc., etc., etc. He went on like that with no exaggeration for an hour and 20 minutes. A solid hour and a half, including the initial question and answer bit at the beginning. I wasn't even mad. I just let him ramble on. At the end of it, he asked if he would be starting that day or if I needed to do some of this paperwork stuff for him. He hadn't even filled out his pre-hire information forms. Absolutely majestic. Of course he didn't fill those out. The man had work to do. No time to be filling out any silly forms, gotta focus on getting things done. Yeah, and doing stuff is a lot more productive than paper and typing things up. And he's a guy who does things, not a guy who types and writes down things that have to be done. just skips the extra step and just does it. My dad made someone lose it in an interview. The interview happened in a cubicle near his, and the way the applicant sat, he had direct line of sight to my dad, while his coworker had her back to him. He sneezed, and his dentures flew out of his mouth right into his garbage can. The guy lost it. He was screaming with laughter. The coworker was really mad that the candidate wasn't taking the interview seriously, especially since all he was laughing at was my dad, fishing out something out of the basket. That's hilarious. Did the coworker eventually find out your dad had sneezed his dentures into the garbage can? I couldn't fault anyone for laughing at that. Yeah, she learned about it afterwards. The candidate couldn't stop laughing long enough to explain. I was sitting in on an interview and this kid comes in with an open Hawaiian shirt and khakis. This was for a state job, mind you. When asked if he had any questions for us, he goes, "Yeah, do you drug test?" And when walking him out of the building, he looks at the pictures of all the heads of that department and stops at the only woman there and goes, "When can I meet her? I want to know about her life." We immediately shredded his application. In 2010, I conducted an interview with an applicant for a warehouse job. During the course of the interview, I mentioned my slight frustration about the grounded flights in Europe due to the volcano eruption in Iceland. Grounded flights meant we weren't receiving stock and work was slow as a result. The applicant chimed in with, and I'm paraphrasing, "It's just another one of those things. He knows. He's mad." Who's mad? God. He's mad. Just like that big tsunami a few years ago. God's mad and he's letting us know. We need to be more careful. More careful about what, do you think? This whole gay acceptance thing. God's mad and he's letting us know. We need to abide by the good book or this kind of thing is just going to keep happening. Then he failed the drug test. Were you interviewing Mac from It's Always Sunny? I was working as a front-end supervisor for a big box retailer going into the holiday season. This was the beginning of November. I get this girl who came in for an interview and I let her know it was seasonal work, but that we would be keeping some of the seasonal hires after January and inquired as to whether she was looking for seasonal or long-term. In the most stereotypical Valley Girl voice I've ever heard, she replied, "Well, I basically got in trouble for bad grades and staying out too late, and my parents are making me pay for my own car insurance this month." That was it. She just stared at me, expecting me to hire her on the spot. I did not do that. I do still wonder if she ever got a job that helped her pay her car insurance for that month, though. Well, at least she got that far. Some rich kids probably don't know what a job interview is. Reminds me of my favorite Futurama quote. Amy, "It's okay, Mom, you and Dad can just stay with me." Mrs. Wong, "Who do you think has been paying your rent?" Amy, "What's the rent?" I sat in for RA interviews at my college. We had an Eagle Scout come in and take us page by page through a scrapbook about his scout career. Page by page. It was 10 or 20 pages of him explaining each and every one, taking a minute or two each time. We interrupted him to continue the interview, to which he got a little angry and said he was almost finished. He was able to add a page after the interview on how being an Eagle Scout doesn't guarantee you an RA job. I once had an interview at Home Hardware when I was younger. The boss asked me that stupid, "Where do you see yourself in 10 years?" question, and my dumbass answered, "Not working at Home Hardware when I'm 30. It wasn't a jab at him. I kinda rambled about having goals, and that flew out in the end. So the 35-year-old didn't hire me after I insulted him to his face. Go figure. Now I try to be more present in the moment and less of an idiot. My dad was interviewing at a bunch of law firms. During an interview with a smaller firm, he was asked, "What makes you prefer to work here instead of a larger firm like Kravith, the firm he ended up at?" He responded truthfully, "I wouldn't prefer to work here. Very sweet man, very smart, very accomplished, but pathologically incapable of lying during interviews." It's a curious phenomenon that we're at a point where we're rewarded for lying. We know we're lying, they know we're lying, yet the best lie wins. I sat in on interviews with a manager at the restaurant I worked at. I remember this application he pulled specifically because the kid was from the same rough part of town the manager was. The manager comes in on a 5-minute rant on how much he hates scam artists trying to get money off of decent people in the streets. Upon hearing this, the kid launched into a story about telling people he locked his keys in the car with his wallet and just needed $20 to pop a lock. Explains he could make $300 on a good day. The kicker? He doesn't even have a car. He laughs while all of us stare at him dumbfounded. The manager kicked him out, and he got a job down the street. That moment when the scam artist and the manager realize they've met once before. 10 minutes later, the manager notices his wallet is missing. Again. Had a girl sit across from me, put her elbow on my desk, then rested her head flat on her hand so that her head was now sideways. She stayed that way through the entire interview. Another time, I asked a guy if he had any special skills. He replied, "Keeping it real with y'all." Maybe she liked to interview in landscape mode. I'm not a boss, but my boss was actually just telling me about a woman she interviewed for my job about 6 months ago before I was hired. She came in for the interview in cut-off jean shorts and a nice top that was more appropriate for the club scene. Anyway, my boss decided early on in the interview that this woman wouldn't be hired. After all the initial cliche questions, the woman would answer, I'm not sure. They say their goodbyes. We'll let you know," kind of crap, even though they didn't hire her. The following Monday, though, she came in for work. They had to tell her she didn't have the job, and they were still going over all the other applicants. She left, but came back Tuesday and then Wednesday, and every day she came in for a week or two, thinking she had the job. My boss finally had to tell her if she came back, they would call the police on her. She finally got the hint, but damn, she really wanted to work, I guess. This sounds like a story an old person would tell about how they actually got a job from doing this. This is not far off of how my elders tried to help me get a job. Just go in every day, twice a day. Make sure to call immediately after the interview like 2 times. Shake the manager's hand. If the manager is not there, wait around until they show up. Make them repeat your name 5 times to make sure they know it. Leave a framed picture of you in a suit on the counter so they don't forget you and know what a hard worker you are. The worst one I had was a guy that showed up and refused to answer any questions. I don't know. That doesn't apply to me. So after 6 questions, I asked, "Do you expect to get hired after this?" He said yes. I have to know, what did he think didn't apply to him? I'm going to paraphrase here, but something to the tune of, "Tell me about a time you didn't get along with a coworker and how did you handle it?" Nothing special. I work at a real estate company that designs all of our marketing material in-house. As a result, when we were looking for a new assistant, having Illustrator/Photoshop experience was a huge plus. We typically do phone interviews before we ask people in. One of the questions is whether they know their way around. This guy answered yes, and I asked him for a more formal interview. But he comes in, well-dressed, nicely mannered, on time. We go through the motions. When I ask him about what kind of experience he has with Photoshop, he flat out tells me, "Oh, my girlfriend is really the one that does that. I'm not too familiar with that program." He didn't get the job. I had a guy come into an interview for a junior developer role. We were advertising at local universities for current students and recent leavers and had set our expectations to match. During the interview, I gave him access to a laptop with code examples, one of which would simply have required changing the text in the pop-up box to do exactly what we asked, and asked him to write a very basic script, basically a "Hello World" pop-up box, just to show that he actually knew what he was doing. After 10 minutes of confusion, he asked if he could go home, Google the question, and then email me his code. True to his word, he went home, Googled the question exactly, and pasted the answer from the top result, errors and all. He didn't get the job. Every other applicant was able to do the test on the spot in less than 5 minutes, as would anyone who had used the language for any more than 5 minutes. Second was a guy who applied for an L2 tech support position. The first issue was he showed up 45 minutes early and was extremely impatient. Yes, you can show up too early for an interview. So he started off on the wrong foot, then told me the reason he was early/impatient was that his daughter had driven him because he had no car or license. Public transport in our area sucks, so unless you live in one of the surrounding suburbs, you really need a car, taking over an hour on public transport where it would be 20 minutes by car. He's then telling me about his couple of decades of IT experience as a sysadmin, project manager, IT manager, etc., all of which he significantly downplayed in his resume. This, of course, then made me ask him if he had seen the clearly defined salary I had put on the job ad, which resulted in a "yes, I saw that," and would expect a significant promotion and double the salary after 6 months. He somehow seemed stunned that the interview concluded after that. Bonus best/worst job application I've seen was a person who responded to one of my ads with a simple email stating, "I'll take it," and only listing his name, address, phone number, and no resume, etc. The best thing of all was the job ad was posted on an Australian job site for a job in Australia, yet the bloke was from the US. Had he been local, I almost would have interviewed him for craps and giggles. "Aw man, you missed a great opportunity." You could have replied, "Okay, I'll see you tomorrow morning at our office in person for an interview," and then given him the Australian address, and wait to see what happened. I'm in Canada. Applied for a job once around here and got an email with an interview scheduled at their corporate office in Australia. Declined that interview. I had a guy show up who was a redhead and short. He had a beard. He wore a green suit. It was difficult to interview him with a straight face. He didn't get the job. I can imagine he has bought a cheap green suit for St. Patrick's Day and assumed, well, that will do for my interview. Due to some budget cuts, we were forced to replace all of our locally based contractors with contractors in India, software dev. We fought like hell but lost that battle. At least we won the battle to have a phone interview with all of the Indian replacements. Management would have been okay with letting the consulting firm dump whoever on us. During several of the interviews, we would ask a question. Then there'd be a long pause, or even the sounds of typing, if they were too stupid to mute their phone. Then they'd read off an answer that was almost too perfect. They were Googling the questions. I think we managed to find a couple of guys who weren't terrible, but I don't know if all the vacant positions were ever filled. I started blasting out my resume and got hired elsewhere a month later. I wasn't going down with that sinking ship. In the early 2000s, we had an open position for a web developer. I phone interviewed an Indian guy who was spectacular. He was rattling off answers that were way too above his pay grade of this entry-level position. Do an in-person interview with him again, spectacular. Hire the guy? Only the guy that shows up on the first day isn't the same guy I interviewed and barely speak enough English to tell me who he is. That turned into an ugly legal battle that we ultimately won, but it costs the company a lot of money to fight. I think they were just looking to get a payday out of us. I've heard of having a different person than the candidate do the phone interview. In fact, my employer now requires Skype video chat for all remote interviews. But how the hell did they think they would get away with sending someone other than the candidate for an in-person interview? I had to interview a guy for some contract labor. I showed him our work vehicle, he shook my hand and said, "I'm sorry, but I refuse to drive a Chevy," and left. I was speechless. He was giving me the story of how hard he was having it. I decided to give him a shot, and because we had a Silverado for the work vehicle, he turned it down. He has 3 young children. Funny how guys who have all the bad luck are always making stupid decisions. It's like the people who are always complaining about not having money are always the first ones to leave and turn down the opportunity for overtime. They are usually the ones who go out to eat every day as well. Why did you want to become a teacher? The guy cries and spends 10 minutes telling us about how he was bullied at school. I work in a school, not as a teacher, but in IT. Teachers really need to have thick skin because those kids can be brutal. I was hiring for an entry-level position. The woman showed up with a gold nose ring in, professional setting mind you, and a moo nightgown on. She then proceeds to tell me she doesn't have a driver's license while she scratched her breast. She didn't want the job. She wanted to keep her unemployment/benefits, and you have to apply to a certain number of jobs per month or week? Bingo. Unemployment checks on how many jobs you apply to, not what you're like at the interview. And many of those who have no intention of working will deliberately give a bad interview. I was interviewing someone that had come to the US from the country I was born in. Throughout the interview, she kept telling me how much better our country was, and how much smarter and more educated she was than Americans. I politely thanked her for her time, told her that we were looking for a different skill set and attitude, and suggested she might consider going back to the motherland, as it seemed she would be much happier there. She told me that it was obvious that I had become a dumb American and that I should go screw myself. It was funny. Funny how she was trying to live and work in the US if it was so terrible there, rather than le glorious motherland. I have a Mexican lady that works for me, and you know what she told me the other day? That we all needed to learn to speak Spanish to accommodate her better. I mean, really, we are 20 miles from the Canadian border. At my old retail job, I went into the storeroom to grab something as another coworker was clocking in. We overheard and then got dragged into an interview my then manager was doing. The guy, for some unknown reason, went off on a PETA rant and lecture on the evils of hunting and how awful hunters are, to my manager and coworker who just received their deer permits, which he had no knowledge of. He just decided to rant and semi-scream at us and drag us into the interview. It turned into almost a half-hour rant. After the guy left, I asked our manager what that was about. The manager replied, I asked him to tell me a little about himself. Yeah, the guy did not get the job. I was asking the asinine HR-mandated questions for a senior IT role and got to, have you ever been criticized for anything? The normal response is, no, or my boss says I work too hard. This normal up until now guy thought for a bit and said, I get angry when people try to pull the wool over my eyes, and sat glaring at the table. After a bit, I asked if he was okay. He looked up and began a 20-minute rant about the people who'd tried to pull the wool over his eyes. He was devastated when I called him the next day. He thought he'd done pretty well and demanded a written statement of why he hadn't been offered the job. Did you guys send him that statement? If so, were you honest? Or did you pull the wool over his eyes? I was having a total crap day until I read this comment. I mean, it's a great comment and all, but not one which most people would spend like 2 minutes straight laughing so hard you can't breathe, which I totally just did. My wife and kids were like, "What's so funny?" which made me laugh even harder. Anyway, appreciate the comic relief from an otherwise horrendous day. I was working as a temp for a business on the day they were holding interviews for new staff. The business took up one floor of a large office building. Clients and potential employees would press a buzzer outside the building, which connected to the relevant floor/business, and the receptionist would speak to them and then press a button to open the door, and they could come into the building and get an elevator to our floor. On this day, I was the receptionist responsible for buzzing people in. All goes well throughout the morning. Then around lunchtime, 2 guys buzz asking to come up for their interviews. I check their names off and press the buzzer to open the door. 5 minutes go by and they still haven't appeared from the elevator. They press the buzzer again. I buzz them in again. No guys show up. For half an hour, they are asking to be buzzed in and I'm pressing the button and they are failing to open the door. I'm starting to think maybe it's me. But another guy presses the buzzer asking to come up for his interview. I buzz him in, and a couple of minutes later, he's getting out of the elevator. Finally, after almost an hour, well after their interview slots have passed, someone who worked on another floor was coming into the building and saw the guys standing outside. He buzzed me to ask what was going on, and I asked him to let them in. He says he will, and I wait, really curious now to meet these 2 guys who can't open a door. 10 minutes go by, then another 10 and still nothing. Finally, almost an hour after the guy let them in, and 2 hours after their interview times, some lady from another floor comes in leading 2 guys. She says, "These 2 have been sitting in our reception for an hour. Thought I'd better bring them down. They didn't get jobs." Amazing that 2 guys, one just as stupid as the other one, managed to be so clueless after that much time together. It never once occurred to either of them to ask someone where to go. What's the weirdest thing you've done while your brain was on autopilot? I ordered a meat-long football from Subway. I then got upset when the dude had no idea what I wanted. Then we both laughed. What size sub? Meat-long. I spent ages cooking dinner only to pick the plate up and empty it straight into the bin. I was so tired and hungry I cried. I was making breakfast one early morning and cracked my eggs straight into the garbage. Poured orange juice instead of milk into my cereal. Put the bowl of cereal into the fridge and walked back to the table with nothing, wondering where I put my cereal. I've tried to put milk in the cabinet where the cereal goes a bunch of times. I've even tried to put the box of cereal in the fridge. I put the cereal in the fridge a couple of weeks ago and my roommate has decided that's its new home. Every time, he moves it back. Pulled into my complex, walked up the stairs, my keys wouldn't open the door, and then I realized it had been 7 years since I had lived there. This is why you lock your doors. Spooky. I'm just glad nobody was home and I wasn't greeted by a Smith & Wesson. I drove a city bus in college. My route and my commute home had a road that overlapped. Driving home from work one night, I ended up doing my bus route instead of my commute home, and didn't realize it until I ended up at the bus terminal at the end of the line. I guess it was better than driving into my apartment complex with the city bus. Meeting my brother-in-laws for the first time. They asked me what my name was. I said Pete. My name is Tiffany. Just who is Pete, Tiffany? He doesn't want to talk right now. I have poured my dog a bowl of cereal instead of giving her food multiple times. Everything is food when you're a dog. Can confirm, as a dog, your shoes are delicious. Instead of ground coffee, I put a couple of scoops of sugar in my coffee filter and brewed it. I once poured the fresh grounds into the basket before placing the filter in. Upon realizing my mistake, I emptied and cleaned the basket and then placed the filter in its rightful place. Then I poured the water and hit brew. 15 minutes later, I had a full pot of hot water. Not a good morning. Grabbing my keys, phone, wallet, etc. before work. Why is there a TV remote in my car? The etc. included the TV remote. I have done this. Instead of grabbing my coffee, I got my TV remote and didn't notice until I got to work. Damn, that's even worse, since you left something behind to take the essential remote with you. I used to work in a call center and would answer my personal phone with my call center speech. I had to go to Walmart once after finishing my midnight cashier shift from a competing grocery retailer across the street. I absent-mindedly grabbed my stuff, approached the cashier, and asked her if she found everything okay. We stared at each other blankly for a little bit. I worked as a greeter at a store that isn't Walmart. One day, I was thinking about how I had to go to Walmart after work and greeted people with "Welcome to Walmart" several times. I used to work at the airport while in college, and one day I went to get groceries and drove 30 minutes to the airport instead. What did you used to do at the airport? I think airports are interesting. He was an autopilot. Someone knocked at my door, and I knocked back. I worked at a restaurant where we had to knock on the bar door before opening it. I probably did it about 20 times a day for 6 years. Almost every time I open a door that you have to push open, like a bathroom door at a restaurant or something, I knock really hard, like 3 times. Lots of weird looks. Had a pet rat out roaming with me while I made some toast. Cleaned up, put the rat in the fridge, and didn't realize until I put the butter in the cage that, oh crap, went to reclaim the rat and she was all, "The food box is mine now!" Already gotten into the ham. That was the best day of that rat's life. Probably the time I cracked 3 eggs into the sink, one after another, or not putting a bowl under the colander when straining the chicken broth. Well, that was a good use of my time, stares forlornly at browned chicken bones. Opening a mozzarella cheese stick for my daughter, threw away the actual cheese stick and gave her the wrapper. This is all you get. Raising my hand to voice my opinion while in a conversation not at school. I once did this in a Skype conversation. Skype meetings are the worst about this because you don't have any body language to clue you in that someone wants to say something. So usually 1 or 2 people just steamroll the conversation, and you basically have to talk over them for 30 seconds to get them to stop and give you some time. It's honestly a real problem with conference calls in my experience. I cared for a horse for several years. First thing in the morning, I would go put feed and water in the field, lead her out, and close the fence behind her. One morning, as I'm walking back into my house, I hear a weird sound behind me, the sound of hooves on linoleum. She looked as surprised as I that I had brought her into my kitchen. Luckily, she never told anyone, so my secret is still safe. You can lead a horse to your kitchen. Yeah, all she did was produce some apples. Put my phone in the fridge to charge. Makes sense. It's faster if you do it in the microwave. Was at my fiance's house for dinner. Had to leave early. Was in a rush. Kissed her dad on the way out. Ah, crap, something similar happened to me. I got to a party and saw people I knew, mostly female. So I gave them all a hug and a small peck on the cheek, get to the one guy in the group, both of us bearded men, and proceeded to give him a peck on the cheek. We both just stopped and stared at each other. Most of my friends would probably just roll with it. I grabbed my lunch on the way out the door for work in the morning. I kept wondering what that beeping noise was the whole drive there. Couldn't figure it out. Got to work and grabbed my lunch, only to realize I'd actually grabbed the baby monitor. Imagine you pick up someone else's signal with the baby monitor and start hearing voices in your car. Imagine you drive past an abandoned house with it and hear Russian agents plotting to assassinate the president using baby monitors instead of handheld radios. Put the dinner on and realized I had no carrots. Decided to drive to the shop to get carrots. Ended up driving to work. Burnt the crap out of all the pots and had to buy new ones. Cleaning up my face with an electric clipper, thought, oh, missed a spot, and proceeded to shave off my eyebrow. Lose my phone in my hand while in the middle of a call. It's better than looking for your glasses while you're wearing them. Not my proudest moment. Not as bad as not being able to find your glasses because you can't see without your glasses. I tried to put a pacifier in my mother's mouth as opposed to the infant she was holding. The best part is that she was nagging the hell out of me. Once I was feeding my 1-year-old a banana and talking to my mom. In the middle of the conversation, I pushed the banana in front of my mom's face and just waited for her to take a bite. It took like 30 seconds to register that I was force-feeding my 48-year-old mother, not my toddler. It was hilarious. I wear a fob watch at work, pinned to my chest. On my days off, I get odd looks if someone asks me the time and I automatically start pawing at my boob. When my daughter was very young, she loved trains. So I'd take her on short trips in the line past some fields, where I'd point out at the animals to her. Got some weird British alarmed looks that time I pointed out the window and loudly said, "Look, moo cows," when I was on the train by myself. As most males are undoubtedly aware, men's restrooms usually have a fairly standard design. There's a row of sinks, followed by a row of urinals, and then finally a handful of stalls. The accepted etiquette for the men's room is nigh on universal, but for those who might not know, and there seem to be a fair number of you, it can be described as such. 1. Enter the restroom. 2. If there is a urinal available and the ones next to it are not in use, approach and do your business. 3. If there is a urinal available and the ones next to it are in use, find another urinal. 4. If no other urinals are available, save for ones with adjacent users, approach, stare straight ahead, and finish as quickly as possible. 5. If there are no urinals available, use a stall. Be sure to close and lock the door. 6. If there are no urinals or stalls available, stand behind a urinal, keeping as much distance between you and the current occupant as possible, and pretend to be very interested in either the floor or the ceiling. These rules are in place for the specific purpose of minimizing embarrassment, and they work well if everyone follows them. Unfortunately, while in a caffeine-deprived haze, I managed to accidentally exploit an unfortunate loophole. I had walked into the restroom, intent on, well, you can guess, and discovered that none of the urinals were available. Fortunately, one of the stall doors was ajar, indicating that it was unoccupied, or so I thought. Upon entering the stall in question, I discovered that it was already in use by someone who had neglected to close the door, and who was midway through their expulsion of fluids. Had I been in a sounder state of mind, I would have hurriedly exited and waited for a different section of the facility to become available. As it happened, I decided that the best course of action was to lounge against the wall, still inside of the stall, mind you, and twiddle with my phone until the guy finished his performance. It was only as he was nearing completion that I realized what I was doing and rushed to exit the stall before my unwitting co-occupant noticed my presence. Of course, that was right when someone else entered the restroom. They saw me leave the stall, assumed that it was empty, and walked forward right into the original occupant, who was making his own exit. I decided to hold it in for a while after that. I think you have number 4 and number 5 backwards. Depends on if there are dividers between the urinals. I have 2. 1. Walking to work on a very straight path through a nature reserve, I fell asleep and sleepwalked for about 10 minutes. It was so weird, I blinked and suddenly appeared near the end of my journey. 2. Got into my car with coffee and a newspaper, carefully held the rolled newspaper whilst hurling the coffee onto the passenger seat. At the end of an evening scout meeting, we were playing sharks and minnows across the grass when this one kid runs to the end, tripped, and hit his head on the sidewalk at the end of the field. We help him up and ask if he's okay. He insists that he's fine. His injury ends the game, so we all head back into the auditorium to close the meeting. After a solid 5 minutes of announcements and flags, we're sitting and chatting on the edge of the stage. The kid who fell suddenly looks at me with a really confused look on his face. He had been functioning fairly normally, yet he had no recollection of the past 10 minutes, from the moment he hit his head until then. That freaked me out. In high school, I was home by myself rehearsing an imaginary conversation with a boy that I had a crush on. I poured imaginary him a real glass of orange juice. Once while playing an intense board game, I was concentrating so hard that my buddy realized that he could just hand random things to me and I'd take them and put them in my jacket pocket or place them on the table in front of me. I only realized when I ran out of space to put things. The other day, I was checking in at an amusement park. After the guy scanned my ticket, I, for some unknown reason, held out my hand, and the guy handed me his scanner. I knew none of those people were paid. They all just pass on the torch. Post-duty ER was already home and asleep. Mom woke me up for dinner saying, "Food's gonna get cold." Thought I heard code, so I jumped up and shouted, "Where?" and ran down to the dining area only to realize I was at home. Poor food. Why didn't you help it? Please forgive me. I sleepwalk once in a while. Recently, I got up at 2 a.m. and fed the dog. My girlfriend woke up and was like, "WTF, did you just feed the dog? What time is it?" Apparently, I looked her in the eye and said, "Everyone loves a midnight snack. He's a good dog, Brent." I got out of work late, drove home, must have dozed off because the last thing I remembered was being on the freeway a couple of exits from home. Woke up in the garage 10 minutes later with the car turned off. I got home safely without causing an accident. Scared me still thinking about it. Most people are kidding when they tell Jesus to take the wheel. Woke up 3 hours early for some reason and didn't check the clock, but thought I was running late. Rushed through getting ready for work and hit the road. Think it's a bit darker than usual, but it could just be gray clouds before the rain. The roads are a bit emptier than I'm expecting. Must be lucky today. Finally pull up to work and start opening up the shop before anyone else gets in. Look over at the clock and realize I still have 2 hours to go before I even wake up. Almost went home, but decided to stay and just take off 3 hours earlier than normal. I did this. I was in high school and thought I heard my alarm go off, so I got up and got in the shower.
Normally, my mom helped me make my lunch and get breakfast ready. We did everything at the same time, so I was kind of mad that she wasn't there. Got dressed, packed my lunch, ate breakfast, and went to tell my mom goodbye. As I walked into her room, my backpack on and my car keys in hand, I saw her clock, 3:43 a.m. I think this is a joke. Her clock is wrong. Check my watch that I put on but somehow never looked at, 3:43 a.m. Say screw this and go back to bed. Find out when I woke up at the right time that all I had put in my lunch was a banana and a packet of tea, and for breakfast I had cereal with orange juice poured in. I knew this because half of it was still in the freezer. Not a good morning for me. Worst part? I didn't even use an alarm clock. My mom woke me up. Don't know what I was on that morning. Patted one of my coworkers on the butt. I was in the habit of walking up behind my husband and patting him on the butt, so it was just automatic. Fortunately, the coworker wasn't offended. I've done that. I was walking through town with my girlfriend at the time, looking at stalls and shops, and she was in my periphery, or so I thought. She had stopped to look at something else, and a woman of roughly the same height and hair color was standing next to me. I checked my phone for the time, gently caressed her shoulder and said, "Come on now, it's time for us to head off," and just walked away from this woman. I turned around a few meters later to see my girlfriend, a luminescent shade of embarrassed, and this entirely freaked out old Asian woman. I would be flattered personally if I were old and some young thing accidentally carted me off, but maybe that's just me. When you're old, it's always nice to have something random happen like that, as long as you're not being abducted. I filled my car with gas, and when I got home, realized that I had not paid. I went back to the station and told the clerk what I had done. She thought she was missing a payment, but the station was really busy at the time, so she wasn't exactly sure. I paid for my stolen gas and went about my way. I also walked into the convenience store next to my work, grabbed a Gatorade out of the cooler, and walked out the door. I realized what I did when I got back to work. Went back and paid for that too. I once paid for the gas and then drove off without pumping it. My old girlfriend's mom used to pay for fast food in a drive-thru and then drive away. I woke up one morning in college, got dressed, left my room, and got halfway out the dorm before I realized I had no pants on. I did something like that when I was 8. My dad was in the car getting ready to take me and my brother to the game room, and I didn't want to miss out, so I ran to the car without pants on. Then I hear my mom yelling out the window, "You have no pants on!" When I was sick and feeling feverish, I decided to take some Motrin to try and alleviate the symptoms. Usually I grab the pill bottle and shake out 2 pills, but instead I grabbed the water bottle first and poured water all over my hand. Fever is your body's way of fighting whatever germs off. For adults, if your fever is between 99 and 105.5 degrees Fahrenheit, try not to take anything to bring the fever down. If the fever goes above 101.5, then take something. I feed my cat while I make breakfast. One very sleep-deprived morning, I made cereal in her bowl and put her kibble in my cereal bowl. I didn't realize I screwed up until I shoved a giant spoonful of cat food in my mouth and chewed a few times. So, how did it taste? Like old beef jerky flavored sand? Was really tired but too hungry to sleep once. Went downstairs to make a PB&J. Once I was done, I put the knife in the fridge and held the peanut butter under the sink faucet for a good minute trying to process why something was wrong. Wait, do you refrigerate your PB? It depends on the peanut butter. The common stuff usually can just go in the pantry. The organic or all-natural stuff or whatever usually requires refrigeration. Spoon into the trash and yogurt cup into the sink, then face-palming when I heard the wrong sound, the plastic cup instead of the metal spoon. I'm a security guard for Amazon, and I have to do bathroom checks. Caught myself yelling, "Security!" right before going into the restroom at a bar on my day off. Thank God it was empty. On a similar note, I did park maintenance for a while and often entered the opposite sex bathroom to clean. I have found myself yelling, "Female maintenance worker!" before entering the ladies' room. When I was in school, 6th grade I think, my mom would make a bagged lunch. She would wrap soda cans with aluminum foil so they would stay cold. Pretty sure that doesn't work. One day, I unwrapped my soda and discovered that she packed me a beer that day. What did you do with the beer, and why is the answer that you chugged it? Had I been a year or 2 older, I probably would have drank it. I gave it to the lunchroom teacher who has known my mom for years. I used to fall asleep in class quite often, and normally my writing would trail off into something illegible, and then I'd be out for the count for 10 to 15 minutes. One time, I woke up after an in-class power nap to find that my writing had trailed off, and then I'd written, "my son," as clear as anything at the end of the sentence. I was 13 to 14 at the time and didn't have any children. This brings back memories of sleep-deprived days in class. My social studies teacher always had a Bluetooth speaker with him, and if someone fell asleep in class, he would put it right against their ear and blast death metal. Most of his victims woke up and fell out of their chairs. Ah, the good old days. Was in a class where this guy would always fall asleep. One day, the teacher decided to have everyone quietly leave the room. He changed the 2 clocks in the room to 4 p.m. School let out at 2:30 or so, turned off the room lights and hallway lights, and then on his way out of the room, he closed the door just loud enough to wake the kid up. The kid came bolting out of the room to a hall full of students laughing. Good times. What is the dumbest rule your school ever had? The frames on your glasses could only be black, otherwise you'd be sent home or have to spend the day without glasses. Any idea why? Or was it just an "it is what it is" rule? Yeah. The principal would just introduce stupid rules that he thought would bring discipline to the school or some crap like that. Back when cell phones weren't really what they are now, if you got caught with it, the principal would take it for the rest of the semester. Well, sure enough, I got my phone confiscated and my mom went in there raising hell. She told them they don't pay the cell phone bill and that holding it for months was basically theft. They ended up changing the rule after that. I honestly don't know what they were thinking. My high school tried that crap. They changed it so that you paid $15 and had to get your parents or their permission to get it back. I got mine taken when it vibrated and the sub heard it. I didn't have it out. She never saw it. She was standing right by me and heard it. I was 18, so I didn't need my mom to come get it for me. I told them I wasn't paying to get something that is already mine and they can't charge us for it. They stopped charging kids to get it back, especially after people found out the people/teachers in the office were going through kids' phones. You should have taped a bunch of pubes all over it, so if they confiscate it, they'll get pubes on their hands. Around the time Pink Floyd's The Wall came out, students were forbidden from playing Another Brick in the Wall Part 2 on the school grounds. Students got a letter to give their parents from the school superintendent. He felt the lyrics, "We don't need no education," and "Hey, teacher, leave those kids alone," were revolutionist, and anybody playing the song was considered a dissonant by the school superintendent. This is what 4th, 5th, and 6th graders were talking about here. Parents had a field day, citing all sorts of free speech violations. Superintendent was fired at the end of the school year. That song is about the only thing I remember from 4th grade. If you were late to school at all, you need your parent to sign you into school. And obviously, anyone with 2 working parents would see this as the idea that if you're even a few seconds late, you have to ditch completely. Can confirm. I've had to sneak into school more than a few times from the senior parking between classes, or I got detention. We had that rule as well. Only problem was once school was in session, the only way in was one entrance with a security cage built in, and you had to get buzzed in to the building. No sneaking in at that point. In the 6th grade, 2 girls were caught arguing with each other in the bathroom. They were literally just arguing about which Backstreet Boy was hotter or something. So the logical course of action was for the school to ban all arguing. And if you got caught disagreeing with another student, it was an automatic detention. I still can't wrap my head around it. We wore uniforms that were ordered from a magazine provided by the school. If our uniform skirts looked to be too short, they were measured with a ruler. Thin girls who wore a smaller size had slightly shorter skirts than everyone else, so we were constantly being sent to the principal's office for wearing the uniforms they required us to wear. I remember this. Summer uniform skirts must be knee length. Winter uniform skirts must be ankle length. The only problem was that a skirt that was knee length at the start of the summer could be too short by the end of the summer if the person it belonged to grew, which people tend to do a lot of in school. I wasn't allowed to wear a yellow raincoat because it reminded people of Columbine. It reminded me of Paddington Bear. During middle school, the locker room lockers weren't allowed to be used because some students leave food in there. Surprise, surprise, a lot of people got their crap stolen and the administration didn't care. The school did nothing about it until a PE teacher got his iPod stolen. Then they started having people monitor the locker room, occasionally, but theft still occurred. I didn't expect it to happen to me. What if he pretended it was stolen so that they would do something? When I was in high school, one of my classmates was diagnosed with cancer. As a form of fundraising to help his family, some students and parents organized a t-shirt sale at the school where all the proceeds went to his family. Pretty much everyone ordered one, and the day they came in, we all put them on over our usual uniform shirts. Later that day, the principal came on the PA to say we all had to take the shirts off because visitors were coming to the school and he didn't want them to think we had substandard uniform regulations. For a school that preaches family, I thought it was completely ridiculous and kind of insulting. In elementary school, a friend of mine sold bracelets to raise money for charity. The principal found out and confiscated the $50 in cash that he had raised, citing something in the student handbook. I asked to see the handbook since we were never given one. She got angry, left, and came back after a little bit with a single sheet of paper that had typed on it, "Students are not allowed to sell things on school grounds." It was ridiculous. Why do such bitter people become teachers? We had to sign out to go to the bathroom, but if we were signed out over 3 times a quarter, 9 weeks, we would get a grade deduction. What? Did they expect you to piss your pants instead? Nah, the 30 seconds they give you between classes is plenty of time. Our school had a uniform with a shirt as part of it. One year, they switched the color to white shirts from navy, but because they had a cheap supplier, they were pretty see-through. As a result, every female student's bra was visible. Instead of acknowledging their mistake and changing the color back, or just switching to a uniform manufacturer that didn't use fabric as thin as tissue paper, they implemented a bunch of rules about what color underwear girls were allowed to wear. It was only for girls, too. A boy with a blue undershirt was fine, but a girl with a blue bra, heavens no. Everyone thought it was stupid, including many parents, but the official line was, if you wore tasteful clothes, this wouldn't be an issue. Having a rule that forces male teachers to comment on the bras of girls as young as 13 is pretty messed up, in my opinion. Especially when many of these children didn't even get to buy their own clothes, but relied on their parents. My Catholic school, kindergarten through the 8th grade, required everyone to wear a white button-up shirt. I guess white blouses in the 90s were pretty thin though, because the principal made the religion teacher gather all the girls together to tell us that we needed to wear more tasteful bras. After that, the principal made our religion teacher once again gather all the girls to tell us to make sure our undershirts, that we used to cover up our wanton, tasteless 7th grade bras, didn't have any kind of pattern on them. How about you just stop creeping on little kids, gross principal? Not a Catholic school, but we also got lectures about wearing nude bras under our white shirts. It was so unsettling. It was an all-girls school. I think we were all aware that we had breasts. We don't need to panic over it. You could only wear short-sleeved polos, no long ones. It lasted a day since it was around winter. In my primary school, the younger half of the school had to wear shorts and white polos all year long with no exceptions. The older half had to wear button-up shirts all year and got the choice of wearing long trousers in winter. I lived in the South, and at our middle/high school, we had to wear long pants and had a tucked-in polo-style shirt. It was horrid on the 110-degree days with 100% humidity. No reading during lunch. Lunch is for friends so that you can talk during lunch and not in class. We would have to take books away from students who were reading. It was awful for loner kids. Anything that was not a meal was banned from lunch. Students who brought a pencil, their phone, a binder, or anything else had to give it to the teacher. The rule was repealed after one day when we called them communists trying to limit our freedom. They were sick of people shouting, "Better dead than red," in the halls. No socks with logos on them because they could distract other people's learning environments. Did your classmates spend a lot of time investigating the socks of others? Ironically, the rule made everybody start checking out each other's socks. You had 2 minutes to get from one class to the next. Sounds good on paper until you realize we had one-way halls only, and if your next class was on the other side of the school, you were pretty much screwed. If you were late to class, you had to go to detention for the entire period. What made this rule more stupid was that you couldn't take your backpack into class, so you had to put it in your locker. So between each class, you had to put your books away and get your other books for the next class, eating up your time to get to the next class. Eventually, the school got rid of the time rule and the backpack rule when they realized how stupid it was. My school had a 5-minute moving time between lessons when I was in year 7, but in year 8 we moved into a new site for some reason, and they decided to get rid of moving times. This meant that you had 0 minutes to move between classrooms, but there were 5 school buildings: humanities, design, science, PE, and drama/dance, etc. Subjects 3 out of the 5 buildings having 3 floors. It took about 5 minutes to move between rooms depending on where your next class was, eating up a lesson time. Thankfully, they didn't give us detention or anything if we did turn up late. We had a 5-minute moving period, but half the teachers took it as, "let's keep the lesson going for 5 more minutes" rule. You would often end up late to stuff. Then again, the worst one was the class I took that didn't seem to have a set room. When I went to the 6th form, this got worse. We had some classes in a completely separate building. The building was a good 3 to 5 minutes from the exit to the entrance of the actual 6th form. This got worse when you realized that one of the classes was on the 3rd floor of an offset stairwell in the back, constantly late from that building. I taught at a school where students couldn't be in the hallways during lunch for any reason at all. During my last week there, my students wanted to throw me a going-away party in my classroom during lunch. I told them it wasn't necessary, but they insisted, which I thought was a nice gesture. About 5 minutes into lunch, no students had stopped by, and when I went into the hallway, they were standing there in front of another teacher who was telling them they couldn't go to my room. When I politely approached my colleague and explained the situation, she tried to stand steadfast and tell me no. Even after I told her they had permission and they'd be under my supervision the entire time, she still said no. Finally, knowing it was my last week, I told my students to go to my room anyway because I wasn't having this crap, and it wasn't fair to my students who'd spent a lot of money on a cake. My colleague went and told our boss, who pretty much just ignored her. Guess who's not getting a cake when she leaves? Funny thing was that she was retiring. The school had a shindig for her, but not one student gave her anything. They tried to make the halls and stairways one way. It lasted maybe a year. We have a one-way corridor at my school. It doesn't work at all. I went to a school with really thin corridors, so they were all one way. One day there was a leak in the ceiling, so they had to block off an entire section and make one of them two-way. Chaos ensued. Kids were literally running face first into each other and falling, causing kids behind them to trip, causing a massive pileup. I was unlucky enough to get caught in the middle of one and almost got crushed under a wall of students. It was kinda terrifying, but at the same time pretty hilarious watching all the robots try to function without their instructions. I don't miss that school. My elementary school took the safety first rule to mean that anything where someone got hurt became banned. This meant that any popular game inevitably got banned after a few days. After conventional games like basketball, soccer, tag, etc. got banned, we were left with safe games. Then they banned yo-yos after a kid got hit with one, invisible sword fights, and jump ropes. Once they banned all physical activities, things started to be banned for causing emotional harm. Trading card games like Magic, Pokemon, slumber party games like Mafia and Detective. It became a game in itself to see how quickly you could get something banned. They wondered why kids couldn't pay attention in class. Zero tolerance. Any fight or schoolyard scuffle resulted in both parties being suspended regardless of the circumstance. One kid could walk up to another kid and punch him in the face without warning or explanation, and both get suspended. Brilliant. My dad actually told me to fight back as hard as I wanted after I told him my friend got suspended for something like that. If you're getting suspended regardless of who's at fault, punch the guy in his face. You'll still be in trouble, but at least you'll give as good as you get for it. Good old zero tolerance. It's why I still fly into a full-on rage whenever something small happens, still trying to get bang for my buck. Not a permanent rule, but we had dress-up days for homecoming. In my area, at least, Thursday was always toga day for the seniors. So we had toga day, and all the seniors were sitting in the first period when an administrator came in. He told us we had to change because we were showing our shoulders. They approved toga day. Do they not know what togas are? It's these lessons that really prepare you for the American workplace, run by these same types of dumbasses. At my school, you need to have a signed doctor's note to bring a water bottle to school. You can get suspended for bringing it. Would you even have to be a doctor to say that water is essential to human survival? Hey, water is for the weak. I don't drink water, and I don't feel any negative side effects. To be honest, I don't feel anything at all. I went to a private high school that had a ton of stupid rules. In the driving section, it stated that students were not permitted to park their vehicles on top of the school buildings. The only way you could get anything on those roofs was with a crane. My favorite rule was no running on school grounds, including sports fields. The rule was removed after students realized that it would be breaking the rules to play any sport above walking pace. And hilarity ensued as prefects started handing out detentions at the finishing line at our annual school Olympics. That first rule is directed at the rich kid and his private helicopter. Didn't this happen at MIT once? They disassembled the car and took the parts up the stairwell and then reassembled them on the roof? We had a rule in our dining hall where you weren't allowed to move seats again after you'd sat down at the first one. To this day, I have no idea why, but it was official and clearly written down. Not too rigorously enforced, mind you. Also, they briefly banned talking at my junior school's dining hall. For a 6-year-old, this was genuinely very oppressive. keeping in mind how much stricter and more aggressive teaching practices were in the early 1990s. It's also worth noting that many of my teachers at that time were middle-aged or nearing retirement. Hence, they had their teaching heyday in the 1960s and 1970s, when you could be shot for not doing your homework. Some parents complained, and the ban was lifted. In elementary school, if the kids in the cafeteria talked louder than a whisper, the school would go nuts and ban us from talking altogether. We had a lot of silent lunches. Who expects preschoolers and 5th graders to whisper at lunch? The lunch ladies weren't required to wear hairnets because they had some sort of spray-on replacement that was supposedly effective at doing the same thing. Eventually, we all got tired of picking hair out of our food, so a group of kids decided to boycott the school lunches by packing 300 paper bag lunches and handing them out to whoever wanted them. That day, there were only around 10 people who ate the school lunch, and most of them were special needs students who were forced to, by their supervisors, to not participate. So a few hours after lunch, we all got called into an assembly where they began lecturing us about how rude we were to the lunch ladies. Apparently, we'd hurt their feelings because we didn't want to eat their food. Thus, a new rule was born. You aren't allowed to eat a lunch that someone else brought to the school for you. They claimed it was not only rude of us to boycott the school's lunches, but it was also a safety risk. Some of the lunches contained peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, but there was a cluster of peanut allergy lunches available that day as well. Clearly, the students should have then organized picking up lunches outside of the school during the morning so that people technically brought their own lunches to the school. Or just went on a hunger strike. Eat a giant breakfast and then push through lunch until you get out. At my elementary school during lunchtime, we had 5 minutes of silence. After everyone sat down to eat, the teachers would call 5 minutes of silence, and if as much as noisily crunched on a cracker, they sent you to detention. You can imagine how hard this is for 1st through 5th graders. I transferred to a new school back when I was probably in the 3rd grade. They also had a 5-minute of silence rule too, but they never explained it to me when I got there. The teachers would ring bells and the kids would just get very quiet. Anyways, the first day of school, they rang the bell and I asked all of the kids what was going on. Bam! Instant detention. It's their legal way to try to do a prayer break, really. In the school I attend, if you are even 1 minute late, you get office detention, and every day there are like 100 to 200 people in it. In my 7th grade, if you were even slightly late for class, you had to go to the office to get a late slip, which is a half-hour process that makes you miss most of the lecture. That's basically my school in a nutshell. People hate being late and getting detention because of that, and actually just go home instead of facing the consequences. If you go home, you are marked as absent, so nothing happens. You can only write with one hand. Doesn't matter which one is left or right, but it can only be one. If you are ambidextrous and write with both hands, that was against the school rules. You had to pick a hand, and the hand that you didn't pick would be tied to the chair for the rest of the day. Oh, you can only use scissors with the hand that is tied down? Too bad. This sounds like something that would happen in the 1950s, except this was 1995 in the UK. I had to sign in and out of a logbook to use the bathroom. Supposedly, it was to prevent vandalism and graffiti. It didn't work. Same at my old school. Nobody checked, so edgy 14-year-old me just drew a huge cock every once in a while, since the book was behind the teacher. After reports of older kids hogging the swing sets, my elementary school's principal implemented a plan to ensure complete fairness. In order to use the swings, students would be required to fill in a sign-up sheet in advance and wait to be assigned a 15-minute swinging time slot. Students were issued colored pennies during their time slot so that noon-hour supervisors could enforce the rule. My elementary with swing sets was dealt with by the kids. I have no idea where the rule originated, but it was well in place when I arrived, at grade 3. If you arrived at the swing set and all the swings were in use, you picked which one you wanted and stood to the side of it, watching the swinger. While doing so, you counted slowly, too quickly, and you were made to redo it, to 100. At 100, the other swinger would hop off and you could have your turn until someone else counted you off. Guys with long hair had to have their hair up in a ponytail at all times. Girls could have their hair in whatever way they wanted. Most of the teachers would let this slide, but my art teacher in early high school, when I forgot my hair tie, they forced me to sit holding my hair in a ponytail with my left hand while drawing with my right. This may be stereotyping a bit, but of all the teachers to not allow leeway on some expression of self or individualism kind of grounds, I did not expect the one that teaches art, the thing often about or including expression of self or individualism, to enforce that rule. Some art teachers are artisans, not artists. They know the skills of art, but the ethos thoroughly escapes them. My high school banned sporks. I created this game where everyone buys a spork for $2, and you eliminate other players by stabbing them when they don't have their spork on hand. Last man standing wins all the money. What I didn't expect was how many people wanted to play and how committed everybody was going to be. I ended up with close to $250 and a 3-week of Battle Royale in the halls, at home, and at sporting events everywhere. I was sent to the principal's office being accused of starting a gambling ring and creating the biggest distraction the principal had ever seen in his 30 years of education, blah blah blah. The school banned sporks pretty soon after. Good times. You're a goddamn hero. I mean, I would have hated you with a passion because of the people who would stab me regardless, but a hero anyway. You had to ask to go to the bathroom, which is fine unless you have a pinhead teacher, but then you had to ask separate permission from the student office thing to use toilet rolls, which they gave you a set amount of squares for. I genuinely never understood the point of that one. Also, my school had a rule where you were only allowed to have natural eye colors. Not natural makeup, natural iris color. I'm taking a guess that it was more about embarrassment than anything. For instance, if a student would rather take a 30-minute crap every day or just sit on the toilet to get out of class, they'd have to suffer the embarrassment for it. I knew kids who faked bowel trouble on a regular basis because they'd rather go hang out in the bathroom than sit in class. The thing that gets me about this is that if students would rather publicly claim bowel troubles in front of a class of other kids and go hang out in a nasty school bathroom, why do none of these administrators ever assume that just maybe the teacher isn't doing a good job of inspiring children and creating a good learning environment? Why do students always get reprimanded when it's clear that it's come to a point where they'd literally rather do anything else under the sun than stay in class? I'm not saying everyone with the proper conditions to learn is going to be front row teacher's pet material, but school bathrooms are some serious last resort crap. You were not allowed to go to the school library during your lunch break unless you had a pass from a teacher. This was because the city planners decided that the school library for the newly built high school would double as a public library. So there were exits directly out into the parking lot, which meant kids could go in the library and then go out of the library exit to skip classes. I even had library personnel hassle me when I visited the library a year or two after graduation, because I still looked young enough to be a student there. Reminds me of a school down here in North Carolina. I didn't go to the school, but security was called when I refused to listen to any of the staff to go back to class or tell them my name. Eventually, I just threw out the name Ben Dover and left. Reminds me of something that happened to me. In my town, high schools got out at 1 p.m., middle schools got out at 2, and elementary schools at 3 p.m. I was in high school, and after class I went home, changed, and went for a jog. My run took me past my old middle school, at which a hall monitor was standing in the parking lot. I was on the opposite side of the street, so not on school property or anything, and she yelled at me to go back in class. I ignored her because I was on my own time and did not owe this woman an explanation, and she got in her golf cart and chased me down. I explained that I no longer went to this school, and no, I would not go with her to the office to call my parents. She then tried to nab me for dress code, at which I continued to say that I did not have to follow because I was on my own time. She asked to see my high school ID, which I did not have on me because I had no reason to. Finally, I just walked away, to which she screamed at me, "You can't hide your immodest clothing from your parents forever!" What is a fun fact that you would like to share for no apparent reason whatsoever? Ellen from spin class is getting a rice cooker. Way to go, Ellen! You just can't beat the convenience. In late April of 1986, all the nuclear power plants across Europe seemed to experience radiation leaks at the same time as their radiation alarms went off. This turned out to be the first hint in the West of the Chernobyl disaster, news of which the Soviet Union had taken steps to suppress. That's fascinating. So this is what having fun is like. The reason train tracks have gravel beds is so that the vibrations from the train rumbling across doesn't damage the structural integrity of the tracks. The gravel allows for safe flexing and shifting of the foundation. Also drainage for water, helps stop pooling and erosion. Don't forget the blood when someone gets run over by a train. Led Zeppelin intentionally misspelt lead as lead. They were concerned that lead would be pronounced like the Warriors blew a 3-1 lead to the Cavs, rather than lead, like, there's too much lead in the water supply. Also, they got the name from a negative review early on in their career that said the band would sink like a Led Zeppelin. I thought it was sink like a lead balloon, and they named it Led Zeppelin as a frick you, cause Zeppelins are more impressive. Fremdscham is a German word that means to feel shame or embarrassment because someone else did something embarrassing. It's that cringe feeling you get in some comedies, for example. I experience Fremsham quite badly, which is why I don't enjoy shows like The Office. Second-hand embarrassment? The moment in a movie where you can't look because someone is about to do something incredibly stupid. John Brzenk, considered the best arm wrestler of all time, broke his arm as a kid while arm wrestling one of his dad's friends, and he attributes part of his success to his arm healing stronger than before the break. So you're telling me his life was the actual version of the movie Rookie of the Year? No, his life was portrayed by Stallone in Over the Top. I changed deodorants today. Old Spice was giving me rashes, so now I use Speed Stick. We'll see how it goes. Old Spice gives me rashes too. I thought I was the only one. If the star Rigel in the constellation Orion were as close to us as the star Sirius, 8.6 light-years away, it would be as bright as the moon and would cast shadows at night. I wish we had more moon stars. I'm afraid we only have moons. J.R.R. Tolkien wrote many of the Oxford English Dictionary's definitions of words, beginning with W. My favorite is walrus. Noun: a large gregarious marine mammal related to the eared seals, having 2 large downward-pointing tusks and found in the Arctic Ocean. Another fun fact, the first dictionary, alongside having many errors, was full of joke definitions. The one that sticks out to me was one of the example sentences being something along the lines of, an example of hard work would be trying to compile every word into a book. The 1926 World Series ended in Game 7 when a runner was thrown out trying to steal second base. The runner, George Herman Babe Ruth, was known by many for his ability to hit a baseball really far and was not known for his speed, and the attempt was ill-advised, to say the least. When asked about it, Ruth said, "I thought I'd catch them off guard. My son has this problem, but I wanted to steal." That's the problem with kleptomaniacs and jokes. They take everything literally. When you're half the age of your biological parents, that is the age they had you at. I had to think about that one for a second. That's awesome. Charles Darwin and Stephen Irwin had the same pet turtle. So you're saying 100% of this turtle's past owners are now deceased? So is the turtle itself. That whatsoever is one word. I have a rather inclusive definition of fun. The myth that carrots improve eyesight began during World War II when the British Air Force started shooting down more German planes during night raids. They put it into the press that the British discovered that carrots improved their night vision to explain the increase in their defensive ability. The British didn't find out that carrots help eyesight. They discovered radar. Everyone had radar, they just had substantially improved it so they could guide in the fighters and anti-aircraft. Director Harold Ramis filmed Groundhog Day in reverse because he knew Bill Murray's enthusiasm for the project would wane as the production went along. So when you see Murray as enthusiastic and happy, it was filmed at the beginning of production, and when you see him as irritated, it was filmed at the end of the production. I'd get irritated too if I was filming a movie that even when you get to a perfect take, you have to film it again with very minor differences. Filming Groundhog Day was likely a lot like actually living it. I never really thought about it like that, but actually that sounds maddening. The northeastern coast of the United States has a particularly high number of polydactyl cats. This is because they were considered good luck on ships, so when sailors settled down on land, so did the cats. This is partially correct. They were considered far better mousers, and with rat problems on ships, they were prized. This led to higher rates in those particular areas. Donald Duck's full name is Donald Fauntleroy Duck. He's also an official World War II veteran. The Navy actually has his service record. If I recall correctly, he retired a petty officer? Can't recall exactly his rank. He also received a bunch of awards during his naval career and another award accepted by Disney on Donald's behalf for volunteering to aid in war efforts through propaganda. Lobster used to be so plentiful that people got disgusted eating it and considered it as only worthy of prisoner food and animal feed. It sucked because they ground it up with the shell and all. Is this real? Is that how they really used to cook lobster? I'm from Maine and love my lobster, but grinding that crap up is messed up. Parrots live for decades, and some types can live to be over 80 years old. My mom has a Quaker parrot. I'm going to outlive her. I hate that bird. My mom has a Quaker parrot too. My parents got him in 1992. He is the most ill-tempered bird I have ever met, and he will never die. He's fueled by hate and spite. About 10 years ago, he had a tumor growing on his chest, and we all figured that it would be the end of him eventually. The vet said that it wasn't feasible to remove it surgically. Nope. The tough old bird removed the tumor himself one night with his claws. The next morning, he acted as if nothing happened. The unofficial anthem of American baseball, "Take Me Out to the Ball Game," is traditionally sung during the middle of the 7th inning. It was written in 1908 by Jack Norworth and Albert von Tilzer, both of whom had never been to a baseball game. Jesus, they are literally asking you to take them to a ball game. What crap friends they had. God damn it, Jack, you wanted to go to a ball game with us, and rather than just simply asking, you wrote a song? This is why we never invite you out. You're just so annoyingly passive-aggressive. The blanket octopus is immune to the sting of the Portuguese man-o'-war jellyfish. As a defensive measure, males and immature females of the species will rip the trailing tentacles off of the man-o'-war and wrap them around themselves like a garland. They experience one of the most extreme cases of sexual dimorphism in nature, with the female reaching up to 6.5 feet in length and males reaching 2.5 centimeters. To mate, the males tear off a specialized arm filled with semen and gives it to the female, who stores it under her mantle for later. The male then dies. Jesus. Imagine going through puberty and just all of a sudden having the urge to tear your arm off and give it to some giant woman. Serif fonts like Times New Roman are easier to read as body text, but a nice sans serif like Helvetica is easier to read in graphics and tables. Arial takes up a lot more space than many other fonts, but Arial Narrow is pretty efficient with space. Sans serif fonts are considered easier to read for digital media because of varying resolutions. Low resolutions make serif fonts hard to read. Now that we're at the age of 4K though, serif fonts are making a comeback in digital media. I see them a lot more often as body text in websites. Also, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't Arial a ripoff or variation of Helvetica? I always say that the difference is that Helvetica is a typeface where Arial is a mermaid. During the 2016 to 2017 NCAA football bowl season, 80 teams played on a bowl game. Of those 80 teams, there was only one team which did not score a single point in their bowl game. That team was The Ohio State University. There's an alleged state of war that lasted 335 years and 19 days, aptly called the 335 Years' War, between the Dutch and an archipelago off the coast of southwest England called the Isles of Scilly. What's more, there were no casualties during this war, because the Dutch forgot that they were at war with the Isles. It wasn't until a Scilly historian contacted the Dutch about the war in 1985 and received the information that the war was still technically ongoing that a peace treaty was signed in 1986. The legitimacy of the war was disputed, due to, for example, doubts over the legitimacy of the Dutch declaration of war on Scilly, which is why it's defined as an alleged state of war. Didn't the mayor also joke about this, telling the Dutch they could finally sleep safe in their beds? I think you may be confusing your silly, not silly, wars. There's a town in England called Berwick, which is on or close to the border with Scotland. When England and Russia went to war a while back, it was officially something like England, Wales, Scotland, and Berwick declaring war. In the peace treaty, it was just England, Wales, and Scotland, so technically Berwick was still at war with Russia. This went on for over a century before anyone noticed, so the mayor of Berwick and the Russian leader, update. This seemed unlikely, so I checked it. It was just a Russian journalist. Agreed on a peace, and the mayor said the line about them finally sleeping safely in their beds. Please tell the Russian people through your newspaper that they can sleep peacefully in their beds. There is confusion over whether any of this is true. I think someone investigated it, and there was no reason to ever believe Berwick was named in the first declaration of war. And why would it? So none of it really matters. Shel Silverstein wrote Boy Named Sue. Johnny Cash took the poem and made it a song. Learned that in this sub yesterday. Shel Silverstein also wrote a very adult, very non-PC sequel to it. The word goodbye is an abbreviation of the phrase God be with ye. The word was never ye. The Old English letter called the thorn looks a bit like a Y, but it makes a th sound. God be with thee, the old N. Not ye, thee. The average human body contains enough iron to make a 3-inch nail, and you'd need about 400 humans to literally make a sword out of the blood of your enemies. Has anyone ever smelt blood? I want to try it now. Sounds very metal. Alaska is 425 times the size of Rhode Island, but Rhode Island has like 1.5 times the population of Alaska. Can confirm, am Alaskan. There is no one else here. And by no one, I mean I can walk out into the busiest street in Anchorage, hold my arms straight out, and turn around in circles, and I wouldn't touch anyone. But I would get struck by oncoming traffic, and emergency vehicles wouldn't show up for a good half hour. If you can whisper the word dog, you're not whispering. You're just talking very quietly. If you were properly whispering using only breath, you won't be able to make voiced consonants. The word dog would come out as talk. With that, I don't know the difference between whispering and talking quietly, and still cannot sort it out. You can stop breathing right now and keep it up for the rest of your life. My boss put up a "the more you know" shooting star sign on the board a couple of weeks ago. The current one up there is, "You can drink lava, but only once." I dispute that fact, but we need a geologist. I don't think it would work, like it would solidify before it got to your throat, I feel like. Or something. Tom Cruise was the first pick for Iron Man. Also, Michael Jackson almost owned Marvel. Not only that, Jackson's plan was to make a Spider-Man movie that he starred in. How Ouija boards work. It uses the ideometer effect. Basically, when you ask, "Is anyone there?" you expect it to go towards yes. So does everyone else playing. So all your tiny muscular movements start to combine with everyone else's, and straight as crap it moves. Once it starts to move a little, your brain reinforces the idea and the effect is stronger. So no, Daniel, I am not moving the piece. Fun fact, I have a friend named Daniel who I'm currently angry at for something similar. In Lake Superior, on the island of Isle Royale, is Siskiwit Lake, which contains several islands, including Ryan Island, the largest, which contains Moose Flats, a seasonal pond, which contains Moose Boulder. When Moose Flats is a pond, Moose Boulder becomes the largest island in the largest lake on the largest island in the largest lake in the world. This is the definition of a fun fact. I also read this to the tune of, "There's a hole in the bottom of the sea." The bottom of a totem pole is the position of highest honor. It is carved by a master, while the higher portions are carved by less experienced apprentices. People can see the bottom more clearly, and the master has a reputation to maintain. If apprentices screw up the higher portion, it's not as big of a deal. That said, when people say they are at the bottom of the totem pole to describe their position as lowly and unimportant, they should actually say they are at the top. Camels' thick hair is for insulation against heat. If you shave them, they sweat 50% more to compensate. This sparks the question of why and when some dude thought it was a good idea to shave a camel, so that this fact could be found out. The Tesla Roadster supercar has linear acceleration. The time it takes to go from 0 to 60 is the same as the time it takes to get from 60 to 120. What about drag at higher speeds being a dominant factor? If you exhale through your nose at the right tempo, you can recreate the snare drums part of the 21st Century Fox clip. Nailed it. This one gets people absolutely riled at parties. Jupiter is so massive that the center of mass between it and the sun lies roughly 1.05 solar radii from the center of the sun. This means that Jupiter technically doesn't orbit the sun, but rather they orbit each other. I think it's really cool. Source: I study astronomy. Technically, they both orbit a point just outside the sun's surface, not each other. Still, it is an interesting fact. 100% of the population of Mars consists of robots. 100% of the known population. This will be lost by now, but the actual fastest man-made object is not any of our spacecraft. It was essentially a manhole cover. It was capping a nuclear bomb test underground in the 50s and got accidentally launched in the explosion. It went about 125,000 miles per hour, nearly 6 times the Earth's escape velocity. For comparison, New Horizons, the officially recognized fastest man-made object, is traveling at about 38,000. Whaling is illegal in Oklahoma. If you aren't from the US and/or don't know the geography of the country, please familiarize yourself with Oklahoma's place on a map. Also, Joseph Stalin was at one point a romantic poet. Upon his first wife's death, he said something along the lines of, "With her dies my last warm feelings for humanity." He wasn't kidding. I suppose that's how I want to go out. After my soulmate dies, I become a tyrannical warmongering leader written into every history book. Mantis shrimp have 16 color-receptive cones in their eyes. Humans only have 3. So basically, they can see millions of colors that our brains aren't capable of processing. What other colors could there be? Other than light on the far ends of the spectrum, which I imagine would just be redder or more violent than anything you've ever seen, I don't think that they could actually pick up some new aspect of light on the visual spectrum that we can already detect. They probably can focus on and understand more colors simultaneously and would see more clearly some of the optical illusions that trip our eye mechanisms up. Our eyes stop detecting color reliably in our peripheral vision, and we get certain shades mixed up, and seeing too much of a color makes it harder to see that color. They would probably just handle those sorts of things differently somehow, but obviously, this is all just conjecture. The town of Middlesboro, Kentucky is built in an asteroid crater. Abbey Road engineer Jeff Emmerich rewired the input of the studio's Leslie speaker, a speaker that rotates rapidly within a cabinet, so a vocal microphone could be attached to it, after John Lennon had asked for his voice to sound as though I'm the Dalai Lama singing from the highest mountaintop. It's why the vocals on the Beatles song Tomorrow Never Knows sounds so unique, and George Harrison later used this technique to record the guitar part on Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, and on his guest appearances on Badge with Cream. Kinda cool technical innovation that was thrown together in the studio and utilized by a lot of artists in the 60s and 70s, including Pink Floyd and Led Zeppelin. No one knows where the name for the city of Dallas comes from. Dallas is the city in the Dallas County. The county is named after Polk's vice president, the VP at the time of Texas entering the US. No one is sure who the city is named after. The guy who founded Dallas, the city, John Neely Bryan, claimed it was named after some guy he knew in Arkansas, but since he was eventually committed to and died in an insane asylum, this is suspect. When I was in preschool, I stepped on Tim Allen's foot and had no idea who he was, so I just kept walking. He was filming a scene for the movie Joe Somebody. From what I've heard about Tim Allen, he's a real douchebag in person, so I hope you don't feel too badly about stepping on his foot. I was in preschool and didn't care at all. School was over and I wanted to get out. He was in my way. The human brain contains about 8 seconds worth of blood flow. This means if decapitated, you will remain conscious for about 8 seconds. A French scientist proved this when he was sentenced to death by requesting to be put into the guillotine face up, saying if he remained conscious, he would blink as long as he could, and he did. Uppercase and lowercase actually derive from where the metal type pieces used in original print presses were physically stored. Lowercase type pieces were stored in the lower portion of the case for easy access, while the less commonly used uppercase type pieces were stored in the top portion of the case. You can have an odd number of wisdom teeth. I, for example, had 5. I had 3, but this is not uncommon. There are some human populations, such as the Inuit, where a genetic mutation preventing the formation of any wisdom teeth is not uncommon. Your forearm and foot are roughly the same length. Windows won't allow you to name a folder aux. I found out by naming a Java package aux on a Linux machine and spent an entire afternoon trying to figure out why it would not download from a repository. Vincent van Gogh painted his Starry Night because he had toxic levels of a compound known as digoxin in his blood. It is used now to help treat heart failure, but it occurs naturally in plants that Van Gogh had in his garden, which he ate. Toxic levels cause people to see yellow and blue halos around light sources, which inspired his painting. What is your most wholesome secret? I secretly drop pennies. For many years, my uncle used to bend down and pick up every penny he came across, which was maddening to my aunt, who was worried the neighbors would see him and assume they were poor, needing every penny they could find. They used to tease each other about it. My uncle got cancer and passed away after a very long struggle. After the funeral, we were walking to the car and my aunt saw a penny and said, "Oh, John is thinking of me. He left this penny for me today." So whenever I am around my aunt, I purposefully drop pennies on the ground for her to find. I haven't been caught yet, and I hope I never do. I drop pennies because I have an irrational fear of them. I like your reason more. It's okay. You're in a safe place. The pennies can't get you here. When I was a kid, I used to always twist the quarter machines on the way into the stores just in case. Got lucky a couple of times and a few free toys. Now that I'm grown, if I'm leaving a store with them, I like to drop change into them, if I have it, and leave them half twisted. I used to think that people just forgot their quarters, but as I age, it's things like this that just keep me happy. Thanks for helping out some poor kids and kids in general. I operate some machines like this and occasionally find a quarter sitting in them. Wasn't sure why until now. I'm taking my science geek housemate to Switzerland to go to CERN at the weekend. I've tricked him into taking Friday and Monday off work, stolen his passport, and slowly been stealing his clothes from him when he's hung them up to dry. I'm an expert packer, so I fit all we need for the weekend in one backpack, so it won't look unusual when we leave for our day out at the beach on Friday. I was ill for a while and he was practically my nurse, so I owe him. I love surprises. Every year for my mom's birthday, when we go on a night out, I give people money to buy 2 shots, one for them and one for my mom. I just ask them to go over and wish her a happy birthday and give her the shot. It's great watching her talk about it to everyone that will listen. How so many people knew it was her birthday and she got all these free drinks. How special she felt. It's worth the money just to see her face light up and get that sparkle back in her eyes. That many shots will accomplish that on their own. I've had my cat for 18 years. I've had my husband for 3 years. He always wanted a cat and never had one. Their love is strong and true, but obviously the cat is slightly more attached to and familiar with me. My husband loves that cat so much and gets a little bit of a thrill out of the idea that the cat loves us equally, even though I've had a 15-year head start. What my husband doesn't know is that I sometimes intentionally annoy the cat so that he will go snuggle with my husband instead, because it's just so damn cute how giddy my husband gets about it. My boyfriend hates cats, but his face tells a different story when my cat starts purring on him and wanting to cuddle. It's adorable, so I don't say anything. Mine is the same way. I walked into the kitchen one day and he was holding the cat like a baby and talking to her. Cue deer in the headlights look and me bringing it up anytime he says a word against her. When I can afford to, I tuck an extra $20 into my parents' and boyfriend's wallets, so they think they forgot they had extra money. They've done so much for me, including covering my bills when I wasn't able to, and none of them will let me pay them back. So it's my way of secretly thanking them for their help and support. This one speaks to me. I'm still pretty young and don't have much of an income, but I plan on doing things like this when I get a steady income. My parents have sacrificed so much of their lives to make mine better, and I just want to pay them back however I can. Same here. My mom and stepdad have done so much for me despite some money trouble here and there. And even though my dad had let me down so often in my life, he too has done so much for me. When I get some steady income, my mom and stepdad are getting their mortgage covered, and I'm gonna get my dad a Corvette, because it's what he's always wanted since I was a kid. And I'm worried he won't be around long enough to see his grandkids. Next best thing, I suppose. Without revealing too much information, my previous job has a major perk, a lottery system in which the winners got to accompany a group of various locations in the world for a hybrid vacation/work trip. I won the lottery one year and was selected to go to Istanbul. I heard a coworker talking to her spouse on the phone about how bummed she was she didn't get it. She was selected as my backup, but did not know who she was backing up. She had hoped to visit a long-lost family member. She is a quiet, sweet, helpful person, very behind the scenes and rather underappreciated. I gave up my spot due to a prior commitment. She got to go instead. I had a great time looking at her pictures. You're a good person. I'm taking my daughters to McDonald's and the movies after school today. They have no idea. They think we're going home to do spring cleaning, which I already did. I can hardly contain myself. I'm so excited. This is so wonderful. My son is only 1. I can't wait to be able to take him places and watch him be so happy and excited. Have fun with your daughters. That's beautiful. I'm learning French, but I'm trying to keep it a secret from my French-speaking dad so I can surprise him. Aunt was going to be short on her rent. I paid the landlord and told him to say that she paid it earlier in the month. She was so happy about it. Made steaks for supper and paid extra on other bills so she'd be ahead of them. Me and my friends once bought a Valentine for a boy who wasn't very popular in our class. We didn't put our names on it, but he was so happy to have received one. He kept turning it over and over in his hands all day. When I see 2 girls walking by and one is clearly more beautiful than the other, I keep eye contact with the less attractive one and smile. In school, I was not very attractive, not very athletic, and not very popular. There was a company of popular girls, and a couple of them would always say hi to me, although they were not friends with me, and congratulate me on my birthday and invite me to events. These little gestures can mean the world to people with low self-esteem. Those small tokens of attention from the girls inspired me to get my crap together in college, do sports, socialize more, pay attention to details, and not be an asshole. As the former oddball girl with the super gorgeous best friend, this would have meant everything. Not all heroes need capes. My dad is a car enthusiast and has always said that he'd like to go to Cuba to see old cars. He supported me and sacrificed so I could go to school, and allowed me to live at home during college. I graduate in May and have a job lined up and little debt. He turns 60 in October, and I'm planning on sending him and his mom to Cuba for vacation. I'm probably late, so that'll get buried, but when I'm in the car with my military-hardened dad, he will occasionally go on long rants about how much he loves, respects, and appreciates my mom for everything she does. And he'll start saying these things completely unprompted and out of the blue, and my mom has no idea. I've started recording these on my phone without him knowing, and plan to throw them all together into one big file and play it for them on one of their anniversaries. My husband isn't the mushy-gushy type and rarely tells me how he feels. Our love languages are the complete opposite. But whenever I run into his coworkers at the store, they always tell me how much he talks about me and how much he loves me. I always ask him what he says, and he says, "I don't know," so I have no clue why they always say that, but it makes me feel all warm and fuzzy. I start conversations with random people on the bus if it seems like they're having a bad day. One of the most notable people was a Russian woman who seemed proud of having a peacekeeper and an elderly Japanese woman who I had to help navigate the bus system with my limited Japanese. Ended up skipping class to make sure she got to her son's place. I work at a grocery store, and a woman with her little girl went through with a cart full of groceries. It was the first week of the month and she was using her EBT card. For some reason, it was declined and she started crying. She thanked us for trying it a few times, and she didn't understand why it wasn't working. It was payday, and I didn't make a whole lot, as I was only a part-time worker. However, I went over to the bank in the store and cashed my check. I went to our customer service desk where she was on the phone with the bank and gave it over quietly. My coworker paid for the rest, and we didn't make it a big deal. She wasn't paying attention and was just handed the receipt and told to go home and enjoy the day. We took care of it. She cried harder and thanked everyone and asked for a manager and was telling her little girl that this was a miracle. We had to tell her not to get a manager because where I work, giving money during your shift is grounds for suspension. I will always remember her gratitude. I love going prowling with my cat out in the street. He loves it so much and is so delighted to have me there, but I'm always terrified of being seen loitering outside of my neighbor's garden at night without a good excuse. Seriously, my boy refuses to be seen with me outside like I'm a parent at a school or something. He'll acknowledge me when he wants in, and he's a total purr monster while inside. But outside, he is a fierce killer of all creatures great and small and wants to maintain his street cred. My cat gets embarrassed to be around me even inside if there are people around. If it's just the two of us, he is all over me. But if someone else walks into the room, he runs away and pretends he wasn't just being cuddled. I carry my dogs to bed when they fall asleep on the stairs so people don't trip over them. I offer people I know lifts home even if they're totally in the opposite direction to where I'm going, because walking home in the cold and dark sucks way more than an extra 10 minutes in the car, and it's nice having a chance to get to know people in that setting. Driving people home one-on-one is like the best time to get to know someone. I know! There's something about the dark and how you don't have to awkwardly make eye contact. Plus, if you're stuck for conversation, you have a huge amount of scenery whizzing past, or you can just chill out and listen to music together. Saw a man in a wheelchair sitting in the rain. Asked if he needed help, and he did. Pushed him to his destination about a 20-minute walk, went home late and got scolded by parents who didn't believe me. I guess it's a secret that it's true. One time, I decided to ask out a girl in a wheelchair after walking away following a short conversation with her. I turned around and saw her on the pavement having fallen out of her chair. I helped her get her stuff together, and as I was about to ask the question, she noticed her new iPhone had shattered and she cut her finger pretty badly on the glass. I got her a Band-Aid, and as she was putting it on, I finally got to ask her if she was busy that evening. She said she had plans with her boyfriend, so I flipped her out of the chair and threw it into a ditch. Well, most of that happened anyway. I always tried to motivate one of my gym buddies by helping him with the last reps if he clearly wouldn't make it. Him saying, "Wow, did you see that last rep? I thought I wouldn't make it, but I actually did. Going to the gym is paying off." Really lightens up my mood. After one of those sets, he finished the next set with ease. You lift my mood, bro. Sometimes the heaviest thing we lift are not our weights, but our feels. Back in college, I liked to do special things for my friends in my dorm for Valentine's Day. One year, I taped chocolate boxes to their doors, and the next year, I taped bags of heart-shaped cookies. My friends would find out that it was me one way or another, but it was still nice to do something nice for the people that I care about. The next year, after the majority of my dorm friends had graduated, I still wanted to do something nice for the people in my dorm. I created about 150 little paper envelopes to cover everyone that would be getting a special surprise. At around 2 a.m., I set out to tape these envelopes to all of the doors on my floor, 2 people per room, as well as all the RAs on all the other floors. I then filled every tiny envelope with a few heart-shaped Reese's and Snickers candies. It probably took about 2 hours to completely finish. I know a few chocolates really aren't that big of a gift, but I wanted everybody to feel some love on Valentine's Day. The next day, some of the RAs posted about it on Facebook. They were saying that we had the best residents. It made me feel really warm and fuzzy inside, but I never let any of them know that I was the one that did it. This is absolutely sweet. As a former RA, I can tell you that definitely was memorable for the staff, and likely the residents as well. And the RAs will not forget that. It'll bring a smile to their face when they think about it. When I was 17 years old, my BFF and I decided to take the snowmobiles out for a ride in the blizzard. We thought it would be amazing to hit some fresh forming powder and drifts. The visibility was low, so we stuck to the main roads. We ended up on a desolate road with 2 homes and acres of farmland. As we got close to the homes, we noticed some lights and went over to see what was going on. It turned out that the old couple living there had ventured out to the store to get food in case they got snowed in. They made the long drive and everything went fine. They had to have hit several drifts that were 1 to 4 feet tall. Things only went wrong when they slowed down to turn into the drive. They didn't dare leave their car out because they feared the snowplow would hit it. My friend and I, in full snow gear, helmets and face masks, dug the car out and shoveled the driveway and made sure they got the car into the garage. I thought that was the end of the story. I didn't even mention anything to my parents. Lo and behold, the next day at church, this couple was there. Our church gives time for the congregation to get up and talk about their beliefs/faith-building stories. Sure enough, the old man gets up and starts telling about their trip to the store last night. He talked about getting stuck and worrying that he would never get his car unstuck and destroyed by a snowplow. He then said 2 angels appeared, barely spoke, unstuck his car, and disappeared as quickly as they arrived. He said that he had been pleading with the Lord for some help, but figured it could never arrive because no one ever travels the road. My mom looked at me and knew it was me. She didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. And what your mom didn't tell you was that she had a little happy, proud cry later that night thinking of you. There's a certain place in my town where the homeless guys and girls go. I save $100 a month and spend it on essentials for them. Most of them are addicts and probably won't ever get back into a stable place, so I just want to help them live the life that they have. However, I have helped very few get into night and day shelters, which in turn they got the help that they needed. Of course, I've never told a soul other than you guys. The guys and gals I help think my name is Justin. I love seeing them smile every other Friday that I visit them. My wife thinks I share my food fairly with her. Joke is on her. She gets the best pieces in the larger slice. Me too. I also take the staler pieces and butt ends of the bread because she dislikes them, and also because I think of myself as a butt end and I wouldn't want the bread to feel bad because nobody picked it. My favorite part about this is that you emotionally relate to bread butts. Now I'm not alone anymore. Have a really poor friend. Wear the same size clothing. I give him my old clothing, but what he doesn't know is I go out and buy new clothes just for him, and I just say they're stuff I got lucky with at thrift stores, on super sale, or just stuff I got and didn't like enough to wear more than once. You're awesome. I'm sure that means a whole lot to him. Living in poverty is demoralizing as hell, and having something nice to wear is more important than one would think. My then best friend had her birthday money in her locker in middle school, and it got stolen. $80. Yes, it was dumb. I think her mom was taking her shopping after school or something. She was really upset, of course, so I dipped into my very limited babysitting savings and slipped $40 into her locker with a nice note the next day without ever telling her it was me. I think I was 14 at the time. $40 at that age is like $1,000 worth of grown-up people money. Before my father died of cancer, he used to like to walk the Florida beaches every morning combing for nice new shells. My wife and I conspired to purchase a nice shell at a beach shop and distract him while one of us planted it in his projected path so that he could find it. Probably the kind of thing he would have done for me when I was a kid. When my husband is out of town, I let the dog sleep on the bed. He's not keen on letting her up on the bed, and therefore I always wash the duvet cover and put on clean sheets the day he gets home. I think he just thinks I just want to impress him with a clean, nice-smelling bed, but really, I have to hide the evidence of letting my furry 80-pound dog up for cuddles all night. I used to do the same exact thing. My ex hated having our dog on the bed. To be fair, we had a black duvet cover and a tan and white dog who sheds a lot. But I'd always let the pup sleep with me when I was home alone. It was so worth it because I could tell how much he loved snuggling all night. I've ditched the guy, still have the dog, who now sleeps with me every night, and I just deal with having hair everywhere all the time. I would occasionally buy things for people who had wish lists on Tumblr, who I followed anonymously. They didn't know me. I didn't know them. They just seemed like nice people. I'd never tell anybody in real life as I don't want them to know I used Tumblr. Best reason for keeping it a secret. My last Christmas, my cousin really wanted Pokemon Sun and a 3DS. My aunt and uncle said she had too many games, but I proposed I'd get it for her, and they agreed. Come Christmas Eve, I got the exclusive 1 out of 2,000 limited edition Sun and Moon boxes for her, but not the 3DS. Well, turns out they were sold out everywhere. She's my favorite cousin, and I promised her, so I had to do something. I already had a 3DS with Pokemon Sun, so I factory reset my 3DS and wrapped it and gave it to her. No one knows how I got the 3DS, but was surprised I got one for Christmas Eve for her. Another secret that I keep is that my friend, who's still working through flight mechanics school, is madly in love with his girlfriend. Well, he wanted to propose to her for Christmas as a gift. He didn't have much money for a ring and wanted to get a $50 ring off of Etsy. I didn't like that idea, so I brought him to the mall and gave him a budget of $1,000 to get a ring for his girlfriend. He got a $700 ring and he said he'd work day and night to pay me back, and I told him no need. I still have the voicemail he and his fiancée left on my phone when they got engaged. He and I are the only 2 people who know the truth behind that Christmas miracle. He's also the same friend I've let squat at my house for almost a year for no charge while he gets his degree. Nobody but him and I know that he lives with me while he gets on his feet. Yes, both of these incidents took place around the same Christmas, this past one of 2016. I've done more in a similar vein to this, such as purchasing and providing a few truckloads of food to the local Korean church so the homeless of the city could eat that Thanksgiving. I've done the same for Christmas time, whether food or presents for the homeless who can't afford them. I always keep my name anonymous because I feel like it defeats the purpose of doing something out of goodwill, as someone will always think you're putting your name out there to brag. I just like the feeling of knowing someone out there had a much better day because someone was generous enough. My little sister was extremely sick with pneumonia in the ICU one Christmas when she was 6. This happened often around this time of year for her because of her asthma, but this time it was worse. She was so sick and tired she lost track of the days in the hospital, even though Christmas was approaching fast. People dressed as elves would come in and bring gifts, and my sister would say, "Am I going to make it back in time for Christmas?" She was so worried and already so upset after being poked and prodded by doctors, draining fluid from her lungs, and trying to get her better. Christmas came and we decided not to tell her she missed it. We promised her we weren't going to ruin her Christmas. On the 27th, while my dad worked and my mom was at the hospital, I got a list from my mom and went to the store to get her gifts. I spent all night wrapping them. The next day, they released my sister from the hospital and we told her it was Christmas Eve. I even promised her she could sleep in my bed that night under all of the Christmas lights I hung up, so she could wake me up as soon as it was Christmas morning. I can't tell you how happy she was to wake up the next day and she couldn't stop saying how much of a Christmas miracle it was. She's 13 and still remarks how amazing it was that she made it back before Christmas, after being so horribly sick and stuck in the ICU. Maybe someday we'll tell her. Reading this really made me kinda sigh, because I've never had anyone really do a lot of nice things for me. Even little gestures like the pennies on the ground or pineapple pizza, I've not been shown much love in my life, until I met my fiancé, who treats me far better than I deserve. So I do little things for her all the time. The latest of which is hiding little I love you / I miss you notes around the house. She found 2 and thinks there are 3, but I put like a dozen of them in the oddest places, so it'll take a long time for her to find them all. That kind of thing really means a lot to her, so I'm glad to do it. My little sister had a full athletic scholarship to Boston College. She hurt her arm and had to stop playing. 8 years of hard work are down the tube for her, and she had to take on a crap ton of student loans. I want to be a musician, but I'm going to keep working in software for 5 years until I can pay off all her loans for her. She doesn't know this and keeps pressuring me to stop doing something I don't like and finally make the commitment to music. My college was free. I want hers to be too. Also, all of her money goes to school expenses now. Every so often, I see some clothes she likes on the internet. I always buy them for her without telling her, and she's not sure if it's me or my mom. My mom plays along. I'm 10 years older than my youngest brother, but we've always been close. When he was 5, he decided to test out whether or not Santa was real, so he told our parents that he wanted Legos for Christmas when really he wanted a giant teddy bear from a store that we go to a lot. The only reason I knew about his test is that I overheard him talking to his friend when I was babysitting the 2 of them. The bear was pretty pricey for a 15-year-old without a regular allowance or a job that wasn't babysitting, but I got the money together, and on Christmas Day, that giant teddy bear was sitting next to the tree with a tag that said "From Santa" on it. He was so happy. He is 14 now and still has that giant teddy bear.
Thanks for watching until the end. If you have a story about how you physically assaulted your siblings and would like to share it with us, please leave it in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave us a like and subscribe. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. Thanks again, and see you next time.